Hey guys, tonight we slip out of warm sheets and straight into a world with no pillows, no porches, and definitely no phone signal, because you wake up 50,000 years ago, barefoot on an African savanna, the sky turning the color of old bronze as dawn scrapes across the grass. Wind prickles your skin, insects hum like tiny tuning forks, and the first smell you register isn't coffee, it's dust, wild musk, and a little bit of uh-oh. You reach for your backpack, your multi-tool, your confidence, and grab a whole lot of nothing. And here's the cheeky truth, you probably won't survive this. Not because you aren't brave, but because the Paleolithic morning doesn't care how many documentaries you've binged or how cozy your campfire emoji looks. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink hard, trying to focus on the simple life you were promised by glossy camping catalogues and slow TV. But within a minute, that romance shakes, rattles, and starts to molt. Out here, the to-do list is short and brutal. Don't get hurt, don't get eaten, don't get sick. Your brain tries to play tour guide, let's find breakfast, but your body whispers, let's find not dying. The ground is uneven, the grass hides holes and thorns, and your feet already negotiate a prickly treaty with reality. You hear a rustle, your heart lifts, hoping for berries or a friendly neighbor, and then falls because the neighbor is probably a spotted hyena whose laugh is less comedy club and more hello appetizer. In the comfortable myth, you picture yourself sauntering off to forage, maybe whittling a spoon, roasting something delicious by sunset. In the real morning, you stand very still and relearn breathing, because anxiety is an ancient alarm clock that evolved to keep your ancestors from becoming protein. That pounding in your chest, not weakness, an inheritance. Your pupils widen, ears sharpen, and you taste the metal of adrenaline. You crouch, scanning the horizon, trying to separate grass from fur, shadow from shape. Romantic survival as find a stream, build a hut. Actual survival, don't make a noise that says new here. Mainstream fact to ground you, humans have been doing mornings like this for an astonishing span. By the Upper Paleolithic, people were painting animals with startling realism in caves we now call Chauvet and Lascaux, evidence that keen observation was a survival tool sharpened into art. That level of attention, reading a hoofprint's softness, a breeze's shift, a bird's alarm call, wasn't extra credit. It was breakfast insurance. And a quirky tidbit to tuck behind your ear, long after this era, people would smear red ochre on skin, which besides its ritual roles may have helped with sun protection and insects. A kind of Stone Age skincare that actually beats your SPF app when you've got no app. Historians still argue whether such uses were primarily practical, symbolic, or both, which is a fancy way of saying, in the deep past, meaning didn't always come neatly labeled. You start doing quiet math. You have no shoes, no blade, no string. Your hands are soft from keyboards and door handles, not from stripping sinew into cordage. Thirst taps your shoulder, but water is a gamble we're not ready to place. A misstep cuts your foot, and even a tiny wound can become a problem in a place where dirt and bacteria throw parties. Hunger chimes in with a hollow echo, but the first meal today is humility. Joke one gentle you glance at your smartwatch for a weather alert. It responds by transforming into an expensive, utterly unhelpful bracelet for a future archaeologist to marvel at. Ah, yes, the sacred counting stone of the early 21st century. You start to think about shelter, but not yet. Shelter comes soon. First, you have to unlearn the city reflex that says, if I don't recognize it, it's harmless. Out here, the unknown is a pop quiz that bites. The wind shifts, bringing a smell slightly sweet and slightly rotten carrion on the air. Somewhere, someone else failed their quiz. You pivot your stance, trying to keep tall grasses in front of you as cover while leaving a line of retreat behind you. You're not hunting, you're not foraging. You are learning in the exact way your ancestors learned with fear, as a teacher the landscape as a blackboard, and your next few breaths as the chalk. You move with tiny decisions, each one a thread. In a larger tapestry, step on the dark soil, not the bright patch. Lighter means baked and brittle, easier to slip. Scan the sky for vultures, because their spiral might mark a carcass, or company you don't want to meet. Your brain, cushioned by modern convenience, starts accelerating. You've got the same hardware as those painters and trackers, but your software update replaced some field modules with grocery apps. That's okay, you can roll back. But it takes time and repetition, and time is the one item not on sale today. The romance of living off the land often forgets the apprenticeship. No one thrived alone on day one. Families and bands built layers upon layers of habit, rule of thumb, and shared warnings. Don't step here after rain. Don't drink there before noon. Don't follow that sound unless you want to meet its teeth. Those rules weren't guesses. They were distilled from countless mornings just like this. Historians still argue whether language by this point carried the same richness and recursive complexity you're using now, but whatever its exact shape, it transmitted wisdom faster than any one person could learn from scratch. And that was the real superpower. You at this moment lack a teacher except the wind. A mainstream anchor again. People were already widely dispersing across tough landscapes long before agriculture. Deserts, steppes, coasts, forests, adapting toolkits as they went. They leveraged fire, stone, bone, sinew, and the quiet geometry of animal movement. You right now have thumbnails and hope. Quirky side note, too, in later prehistoric Europe chewed birch pitch has turned up with tooth marks, basically ancient gum, sticky, antiseptic-ish, and possibly used to set tool heads. You could use some of that now if only you had birch pitch and, well, a tool to set. Joke too gentle, you briefly consider manifesting a latte. The savannah appreciates the ambition and offers you a firm no delivered by a very realistic breeze. Your big awakening today is that the Stone Age wasn't about being tougher, In a cinematic sense, it was about being tuned to the hum of insects that changes when a large animal passes, tuned to the way guinea fowl go suddenly silent, tuned to the feeling in your calves that says a slope is loose and treacherous. You have those dials. They've just been turned down for a long time. Now you turn them up, and the world gets louder, not with noise, but with information. The romance fades, replaced by a deeper respect. Comfort is not a right. It's a project. You slow your breathing nose sipping air, the way trackers do to catch scent layers. There's dry grass sun-warmed, then damp earth pooled in a shaded hollow, and under that, something musky that could be antelope good or cat less good. You keep a tree between you and the open flank and take 3 steps backward, lighter than a thought. If a predator appears, your best move is not bravery. It's geometry, angles, sight lines, and distance. You notice sticks littering the ground, but they are brittle and short. Nothing like a spear, more like a morale booster. You pick the straightest one anyway, because even a false sense of competence can lend your posture the kind of confidence that makes you look less snack-like. The narrative of "I'll just make a fire and a hut" skips ahead several skill chapters. Today's chapter is acceptance. You are a modern person with an ancient body standing on a timeline where survival runs on mentorship. You imagine voices, elders pointing, kids mimicking laughter at your clumsy first attempts. That community is missing, and the silence around you is not peaceful. It's an exam hall. Historians still argue whether early Homo sapiens outcompeted other hominin cousins, mainly through technology, social bonds, or sheer demographic luck. Whatever the ratio, clear patterns rise, coordinated attention, shared labor, and patient practice. None of those arrive via express delivery, yet hope creeps in with the sun. You spot a shallow depression where wind has piled grass against a low outcrop, a place to crouch unseen if needed. You mark it mentally potential temporary refuge. Your eyes adjust to finer grain, the slice of shade under a thorn, the scuff of a hoof near a mud-rimmed footprint, the flutter where a ground bird dashed. Most importantly, you rehearse stillness. Waiting is active here. It's how you don't trip the wire of the landscape's defenses. Joke 3 gentle, you promise yourself you'll never again mock boring nature sounds. On sleep apps, tonight you'll be ordering the extra long, super boring version titled "Absolutely Nothing is Hunting You." By mid-morning, you've adjusted your internal narrator from travel blogger to apprentice. You stop framing the scene as adventure and start measuring it in breaths and blinks. You press your palm to the ground. The heat says move before noon, a caution whispered by a billion sunrises. You test your balance on a fallen trunk and feel your core engage in ways the gym never requested. You begin to sort your priorities into a triangle: safety at the base, water above that, shelter above that, and food as a distant dream. The romance about a cute foraged salad, that's a future you problem. Present you has to avoid becoming someone else's future. You crouch long enough to let small animals forget you. Birds return to their chatter, A lizard scuttles across your shadow. You listen for alarm cues that don't return. In this, you taste a first grain of competence, and it's as calming as it is humbling. A mainstream fact to anchor that feeling across countless ecosystems. Humans didn't dominate because we were the fastest or strongest. We excelled at patience planning and reading patterns over time. You're just starting to touch that page of the book. Quirky thread to weave in later communities would carry small charms, beads, and carved figurines, meaning layered into portable art, perhaps to soothe, perhaps to signal identity. You catch yourself wanting a charm now, not superstition exactly, more like a reminder that you belong to a lineage that figures it out. And there's your debate line for the night. Historians still argue whether symbolic objects emerged first from ritual needs or from social signaling. I'm with this clan, I share this story, I remember this hunt. Out here, symbols aren't frivolous, they carry maps in memory. The myth of rugged individualism often erases that map as if a single person can hum the entire song of a place on day one. You can't. The song is a choir. A cloud drifts across the sun, the light cools. You use the shade to move calf-deep through grass, hugging the lee side of a mound, aiming for an alignment of rocks that could offer a visual break. You don't celebrate, you practice quiet. And every so often, you check in with your body. Are you thirsty? Yes, but not reckless. Are you steady? More than an hour ago. Are you invisible? Never entirely, but less obvious, and less obvious buys time. You catch yourself cataloguing thorns that curve right, thorns that curve left, a cluster of seeds that cling to your skin, a powder that rubs off red. Knowledge has started to stick to you like burrs. The romance hasn't vanished, it has matured. It becomes respect for a world that does not owe you an easy entrance. It becomes gratitude for ancestors who made mistakes so you could inherit their corrections. It becomes a quieter promise you will learn, not by pretending this is simple, but by honoring that it isn't. You glance back at the shallow depression near the outcrop. Okay, that's your emergency pause button if the grass laughs again in that hyena way. Ahead, a stand of trees twists against the sky, branches catching the light like fingers dipped in gold. You aim for the near edge, not the center. Edges are where information gathers tracks, droppings the gossip of leaves. When you exhale, it isn't a sigh. It's strategy. You lengthen your stride just enough to feel a rhythm, not enough to announce it. Every now and then, you let the sun warm your shoulders and think about nightfall. You don't plan the whole day, you plan the next hour, then the next. The myths are peeling off you like old stickers. In their place is something sterner and kinder, a relationship with the ground, with your senses, with the idea that survival isn't macho, it's mindful. The first day was never about thriving. It was about staying in the game long enough to earn tomorrow's lesson. Out here, bravery doesn't look like shouting at the horizon. It looks like listening until the horizon whispers back. You let the wind brush your ear, and for the first time since waking, you feel a small, non-delusional confidence. You won't master this in a day, but you might make it to evening, and in the Stone Age, that's a respectable headline. The romance isn't dead, it's just grown a spine. You keep your head on a slow swivel, not the jittery bob of a frightened rabbit, but the steady metronome of someone who wants to see lunch coming. Before lunch sees you, the wind licks from your right cheek to your left, a useful memo if anything is hunting. It prefers to be downwind, invisible in smell as well as sight. You plant that note in your mind like a thorn, because this hour is about geometry more than bravery, angles, lines of retreat, and keeping tall grass between you and the place where the grass no longer sways, yet somehow feels alive. The savannah sounds like 100 tiny arguments. Bulbuls scold, a distant guinea fowl rattles. There's a brief elastic quiet that snaps back into birdsong normal again, which is both relief and warning. You crouch to borrow the edge of a termite mound, easing your silhouette into something that doesn't shout two-legged ungulate. Your eyes trace the horizon in arcs high to low, near to far repeating, because the trick isn't to find a predator. It's to find the absence, the patch where there should be bird chatter, but there isn't, the grass that bends against the wind's grain, the gazelle whose ears are fixed on a point you can't yet see. You tow a path over compacted soil where prints read like a morning newspaper. Hoof crescents, a three-pronged spore that could be warthog. Then the dog-like oval pads you don't want to see in a cluster hyena. Spotted hyenas aren't as shy as you wish. Mainstream fact to anchor your pulse in various regions, spotted hyenas both scavenge and hunt. And they will test humans, especially at night, scoring with numbers and nerve. That macabre laugh is not a joke, it's punctuation in their social grammar. And in the Pleistocene, their extinct short-faced cousins could break bones like dry kindling, their jaws an answer to the question, how strong is a bite that eats skeleton for snacks? You study the prints more like a friend than a foe. Fresh, the edges are crisp, not slumped by wind. Direction, drifting toward the watercourse you skirted at dawn. You can't read it all yet, but your brain is remembering the shape of the task pattern, inference patience. A quail explodes from the grass 2 paces ahead, and your heart does burpees. You stand shoulders loose, pretending you meant to be so graceful. Joke one soft and sleepy, you give yourself a gold star for staying calm. Then admit you just invented the star, the teacher and the classroom behind a termite mound. Birds resume their normal bickering. That matters. Prey species are the best gossipers and the worst liars. When they know a cat's about, the neighborhood feels it. You listen for the everyone shut up, hush, you'll later learn to dread. Not now. You move again, head high, because the worst look to advertise is lost. There's a reason predators favor the unwary, the limping, the indecisive. You aren't trying to look invincible. You're trying to look like work, the kind that might cost a hyena a scar and a morning limping behind its clan. Quirky tidbit before the next step, hyena. Chatter dries chalk white from all that calcium, and you can spot their latrines by these pale pellets. A sign you should treat the area like a no-go social club where you aren't on the list. You sweep your gaze, and yes, there's a scatter of white pebbles that aren't pebbles at all. Good to know. Better to leave. You adjust your line, keeping the breeze in your nose and a thorny acacia in your back pocket as an emergency, please not my ankles deterrent. Is an acacia a perfect plan? No. But a tangle of thorns between you and a sprinting mouth is more than sentiment. Historians still argue whether predation pressure alone explains early campfire habits, the ring of flame as a defensive wall, or whether the light and warmth began primarily as cooking and social tools and only later took on the role of nocturnal fence. You don't need the footnotes right now. You just need to remember that without fire, the night gets long teeth. For now, daylight is your ally and your judge. You keep scanning because the grade you're chasing is spelled survived until dusk. You practice a cadence scan, sniff, listen, move, scan, sniff, listen, move. In this rhythm, the world turns legible. A drongo's harsh alarm ricochets from the left and you freeze, trying to triangulate. Drongos are tricksters, some even mimic alarms to steal meals from other animals, but their cries still mark events. The brush ahead holds. No ripple, no tail tip. You ease to the right, preferring a longer route with more sightlines. You don't want surprised because surprised too often equals supplanted from the food chain. You picture a mental circle, one body length radius, where you can pivot and sprint without tripping. Your eyes tick for holes, roots, snags. If something charges your move, is not straight away, that invites a chase, but an angled retreat toward cover, never losing sight. The goal is to become uninteresting, faster than you become unreachable. A thought visits and lingers, predators gamble. Don't look like a safe bet. There's a new track at the perimeter of your attention. Heavier, rounder pad prints with a faint suggestion of claws. That probably aren't claws, cats retract theirs. Your mouth goes dry. Lions hunt mostly under cover of dusk and night, but mostly is a word for textbooks, not a guarantee stamped across the morning. Mainstream fact lions are crepuscular at their boldest when light is soft. They like to approach from downwind using cover. You count your blessings in leaves. The breeze strokes your face good. You stay where the shade dapples your outline, also good. You don't run, best of all. Something small dashes and a chorus of go-away calls breaks out Frankelin's maybe. You shift your angle, cutting a path that gives you a crosswind view of a shallow clearing. Nothing but the hair at your neck sits up anyway, which you decide to honor, even if you can't justify it to a committee. You plant a knee, lower your profile, and use the termite mound again, that trusty little fortress of soil and saliva engineering. Joke too tender, you briefly consider asking the termites for a short-term lease. They counteroffer with pay in aphids. A second cadence arrives. Rest your eyes, then refocus them at a different distance near mid-far, as if turning a camera's ring without the camera. You're teaching your modern gaze to stop zooming only for screens and start zooming for survival. The more you do it, the less your head aches. Your ears do their part. They isolate rattle from rustle, the heavy two-beat of ungulate steps from the slinking arrhythmic hush of a cat. You start to feel the edges of a skill that once belonged to you by birthright, and now returns like a song you used to know. A needling thought tries to sell you a tree. Climate says like a billboard in your skull. The rebuttal arrives instantly. Leopards climb and they like their dinner elevated. Hyenas can't climb true, but they can circle a tree and wait while your legs cramp and your courage leaks. A tree is an option, not a plan. A better plan is to avoid the kind of surprise where a tree feels like destiny. Better yet is to borrow the open savanna trick of choosing micro-high ground, even if it's just a termite dome or a slight swell, to steal an extra second of vision in every direction. Paleoecologists still argue whether the Pleistocene predator guild in parts of Africa was denser than today or simply different, with now extinct players shifting the calculus of risk. For you, that debate is a museum label you haven't time to read. What you own is a present tense truth. Predation risk is a tide. And right now, you can feel the pull. You focus on small things. You can manage posture, pace, path, because control here is a miniature sculpture, not a castle. The drongo barks again, but lighter, almost conversational. The chorus around you softens into business as usual. That shift is as readable as a traffic light. You stand fluid and push toward a bank of shrubs that offers shade, and beyond a view down into a cracked ribbon of dry wash. You don't plan to enter the wash. That's a travel lane for everything you want to avoid. But from its edge, you can see along it, and seeing along something is how you keep it from sneaking up. Joke 3 Featherlight, you mentally add line of sight specialist to your non-existent Stone Age resume. References available upon request from several unimpressed birds. A shape glides into being at the edge of sight, too low and long for antelope, moving with a self-assured swing. Your breath bottlenecks, then remembers its job. The distance is difficult to judge without landmarks, but you guess 200 paces and shrinking. You do not stare, you glance, break eyeline, glance again. Staring telegraphs challenge. You need alert, not confrontational. You straighten, shifting your weight as if that spot was always your next step. The breeze lifts a lock of hair off your forehead, and you bless it for carrying your scent away from the shape that resolves on the third glance into a hyena. 1. Not a clan. Its head tilts, reading you as you read it, both of you doing math with a lot of variables and not enough time. Here another mainstream anchor helps steady your hands. Humans are remarkable throwers. Our shoulder, elbow, and wrist alignments, plus elastic energy storage in tendons, make us better at accurate throwing than almost any mammal. A well-thrown stone to the face is not a joke. It's a negotiation tactic, sometimes decisive. You pick up a fist-sized rock without breaking stride. You don't brandish it. You let the motion live inside your gait. If the hyena closes to an absurdly rude distance, you will aim not at its chest, but at its eyes, because eyes persuade faster than ethics. The hyena continues that sideways drift, evaluating ears pricking to invisible news behind you. It sniffs, dismisses, and veers legs, writing a lazy S in the grass. You don't chase its retreat that reads as play. You reclaim the center of your small stage, breathe again, and notice how your fingers tremble with energy you didn't spend. You let that tremble run its course, the way you'd let a shiver finish on a cold night. and then you store the lesson where it's easy to reach. Quirky aside to stitch into your memory, some people in later ages carried noisemakers, whirling slats, sometimes called bull roarers, that sang through the air, tools of ritual and signal both. You don't have one, but you do have a voice, and a low shout sometimes functions like a line drawn on the floor. Not now, because you don't want to advertise to everything else that a nervous human is practicing speeches. But the principle matters. Predators read confidence, sound, and cohesion. The lonelier you look, the more plausible a test becomes. Historians still argue whether early hominins relied primarily on projectile stones and sticks, or whether group displays, shouts, arm-waving, coordinated movement served as the main deterrent before more sophisticated weapons. You'll table that seminar, but you feel the truth running under both ideas together beats alone. Right now together is a wish. So you fake it in posture, in stride, in the implication that someone is just out of sight behind you who is absolutely not imaginary and also very cranky. The wash below gleams with a thin, stubborn thread of water. You do not approach. You watch its margins for prints, and you see them more hyena, a succession of antelope, a hoof splayed in mud, where a weight shifted too quickly, and the round pads from the big cat you prayed not to meet. The pressed sand reads like a diary, nighttime visits, dawn departures, middling, midday pauses. You keep your distance, you drink with your eyes. Thirst taps your tongue, but a sip you can't trust is a coin flip you can't afford. A breeze corrugates the grass, and a small flock of quelleas rises, then drops like a red and brown curtain. The noise is almost joyful, and for a breath you let the music soften your shoulders. You earned that softness by not panicking, by borrowing the oldest trick on the savannah notice. First move second, and the trick pays in minutes. You get to spend choosing your own direction. Your mind replays the hyena's path not as a horror reel, but as a training film. Where did it notice you? At what range did it decide you were more trouble than benefit? How did your angle help you pick out 3 specifics? You can repeat, staying downwind of the open clearing, using the termite mound to blur your outline, bending your route so you never offered a straight, predictable line to chase. That's your homework due every hour. The sun lifts and flattens shadows. You adjust your expectations accordingly. Predators prefer the cooler hours, but the heat does not equal safety, only a shift in risk. You remind yourself that vigilance is a posture, not a panic. Your eyes don't burn holes in the horizon anymore. They graze it calm and regular. You add a small ritual every 100 steps, touch your rock, not for superstition, but to maintain a thread to the plan. And there's one last joke light as dust. You imagine writing a Stone Age dating profile, good at scanning, decent at throwing in joys long walks between termite mounds, seeks band that values not being eaten. You snort a whisper laugh at your own ad. The laugh is a release valve. It tells your nervous system that you are still a person, not just a prey animal with a diploma. When you finally ease back from the wash and choose a line along the scrub, you do it with less hurry and more intention. The hyena is gone, the birds are back to workplace gossip, and your feet have learned 3 new ways not to be loud. The morning has not fed you, but it has trained you. And before breakfast in the Stone Age, training is the only meal that matters. You angle away from the dry wash and let the land tell you where it likes to keep a roof. Ribs of rock lift from the grass like knuckles, shadows cling under their brows. Overhangs are teachers. With one lesson, get out of the wind, away from the sky, and up off the thirsty ground. You keep your scan pattern near mid-far, because anything that looks like a house to you also looks like a house to something that collects bones. The air cools under the first ledge, and with it your pulse. You crouch at the mouth and read the doorway the way you read the morning prints, old scat crumbled to powder, new scat glossy dark, feathers stuck to stone, the faint ammonia of a frequent sleeper. You don't march in, you borrow a stone and send it skipping under the gloom, then wait for the room to answer. Nothing bolts. Good, but nothing is a word you never accept on the first try. You sidle the edge shoulder to rock, keeping your angle open so you're never boxed in. A spill of light from the far side shows broken turtle shell, brittle with age, and a scatter of rodent droppings like pepper. No big cat musk, no fresh paw prints. You allow one breath of relief. The ledge faces east morning sun to thaw afternoon shade to prevent roasting, an arrangement your skin appreciates more than your smartwatch ever did. Mainstream fact to ground your choices throughout the Paleolithic rock shelters and caves served as living spaces and workstations, their soot-blackened ceilings and napped stone floors, recording seasons of return. People loved an overhang, the way you love a porch because it offers sky and wall together. The trick was never just find a cave. It was find a cave that isn't already leased by claws. You pick a sleeping spot against the inner wall where the ground barely rises high enough to shed a surprise puddle if rain sneaks in. Moisture is an enemy you can't see until it starts living in your bones, and hypothermia doesn't need snow to file its claim. In wind and damp, even mild nights can start the kind of shiver that empties your fuel tank. You test the floor with the heel of your palm dust over hardpack. Good. A few armfuls of grass will turn it from floor into not a sponge, and a mat keeps more than chill away. It interrupts the ant superhighways and the itch parade. You think back to the termite mound that saved your outline this morning and smile at a coincidence of architecture. Termite cities are shelters too, moisture-managed and draft-controlled clay fused with spit into concrete. The land is full of engineers. You're trying to become an intern. Quirky tidbit, useful and unglamorous if you rub a smudge of fine ash someday. When you have a hearth over ankles and wrists, it can discourage biting insects and mute your scent. Old camp wisdom that doubles as primitive skincare. For now, dust alone mats the skin and softens your glare. You become less mirror, more rock. You step back outside for a different angle and catch a seam in the ridge that might hold a second overhang, this one lower and deeper. You approach like a landlord and a tenant at the same time. Courteous, alert, ready to back out if the contract is written in claw marks. Inside bones, yes, but small ones cracked delicately. An owl pellet like a felted grey charm. No fresh tracks. You file this as a pantry, not a bedroom, because the ceiling dips. You refuse to sleep anywhere that asks you to dream in a crouch. Historians still argue whether the heavy soot layers in some caves mark long, stable residence or periodic pulses of intense use. Either way, the human impulse is clear. Pick places that do some of the sheltering work for you, then add hands. Joke, one whispered. Around the edges you find yourself evaluating the overhang, like a rental listing. Open plan, south-facing, occasional rodent, minimal hyena traffic. Previous occupant, an owl who paid in mice. You sign with a nod and get to chore number 1 wind control. The breeze threads the lip, curious fingers along a stone mouth. You turn your body, raise your arm and feel the draft's path mapping where a barricade would do the most work for the least labor. You catch yourself calculating drag and eddies as if the air were water. That's exactly right. Wind is a river you can divert with reeds and brush into a gentler stream. Mainstream fact to tighten your plans. Upper Paleolithic groups across cold steppe and taiga built windbreaks and walls from available bones and branches draped with hides, turning open sites into rooms. Similar logic holds in warmer savannas, where a wall of brush is not a cabin, but can be the difference between numb and almost warm. With no toolkit, you start with hands and leverage pry deadfall from snagged crooks, twist long grasses into clumps like giant green rope, and respect every plant that wants to stab you for touching it. The acacia in particular, whose thorns swear clear oaths against your skin. You ferry branches like a minimalist beaver, laying the first course across 2 flat stones to keep the base off damp soil. The frame is a lean-to that doesn't lean too hard, just enough angle that wind skims rather than smashes, and rain, if it comes, chooses a graceful slide instead of a sulking puddle. You lace the branches with grasses, then wedge a thorny panel on the flanks as a discouragement to nighttime creepers who love pajamas made of your ankles. The wall isn't pretty, but it talks to the wind in a lower voice, and that tonight is beauty. You step back and crouch, looking along the line of your work, rather than at it, a builder's trick, even when the builder is a beginner. Where light spills, cold spills. Where gaps yawn, drafts yawn with them. You stuff them with fistfuls of thatch. Your nails pack grit. Your forearms bloom with fine scratches, the kind that will ask for antiseptic you do not have. You note each sting and make a plan, a dust wash. Later, maybe the sticky milk from a plant if you recognize a soothing one. And tomorrow, if there is a tomorrow, a way to bind thin strips of bark into a tie. To close sleeves at the wrist and keep insects from marching up your arms like they own stock. Your thoughts flick north and back in time to colder worlds where hunters stitched hides into coats, whose seams kept wind on the far side of life, and communities used the bones of giant animals as the ribs of houses. Mainstream fact to give your hands some confidence on icy plains far from this savanna. People built mammoth bone dwellings, rings and arcs of tusks and limb bones draped with hides insulated with earth and fat, ingenious shells against a long winter. The logic translates what the land has in abundance. Build low, trap still air. You glance at your brush wall and hear an imaginary realtor in your head purr. Great bones. Joke too breezy as the draft you've just slowed. You add a sleeping mat next to simple sandwich. Coarse stems at the bottom, softer blades on top, then a thin layer of leaves to keep prickle tips from negotiating upward contracts. Lifted off the ground, you will lose less heat to the greedy dirt. Your shoulders sigh at the prospect. Quirky tidbit to pocket for later practice. If you twist long grasses into a loose rope, then braid 3 ropes, you can make a surprisingly tough cordage. Roll that braid on your thigh with a counter twist, and it tightens the friction, making a fiber muscle. With cordage, you could tie the wall to a rock horn, hang a bundle against the damp, even lash a forked branch into a simple frame to dry gathered plants out of reach of certain tiny thieves with 6 legs. Debate time threaded into your weaving, archaeologists still argue whether those mammoth bone structures were permanent winter hubs or seasonal hunting camps around rich carcass sites. The distribution of hearths and tools suggests both patterns in different places and times. The point for you is humbler shelter is strategy, not just a place to nap. It's a machine that trades a little labor now for a margin of safety all night. Your little wall doesn't promise warmth, but it will blunt the bite, and in the Stone Age, blunting the bite is what separates miserable from immortal trouble. You walk the perimeter and imagine water. If rain sweeps in, it will think like water does down and under. You scoop a shallow drip line, a suggestion, more than a moat, so the runoff knows where to go. Your fingers carve a curve because curves move liquids kindly, and kindness toward liquids tonight equals kindness toward you. You picture a future when you'll sprinkle a skin with water and dust to patch wind leaks' primitive plastering. But for now, your toolkit is patience and plant. A thought tempts you. Build deep, build big, build better. You decline. Big eats hours you don't have and announces home to anyone sniffing for you. Better here means just enough. A lean shadow, a quiet corner, a place where your back feels like it has a friend. The afternoon heat presses and you tuck the sleeping mat half in shade, half in sun, so you can slide between them as your body requests. You set a soft rule, your head points where escape is, your feet never tangle in brush. If you must launch into a sprint at 2 a.m., you'd rather not begin by tripping over your own good intentions. Your eyes drift to a pile of dung nearby, not delicate pellets, but the fibrous cakes of a grazing giant. You wrinkle your nose and then reconsider. Dried, that would be fuel. It would also be smoky and pungent, and better burned outside your wall line. You mark the idea with a mental ribbon, a promise for a later section that belongs to fire. For shelter dung has one more gift, a crumbly block set. In a gap can slow a sneaky draft. You grin at the absurd thrift of it all. Joke 3 as gentle as twilight if minimalism had a magazine. This page would feature your brush wall, bold textures, earthy palette, avant-garde, Use of local materials, hyena chic. Dusk is an artist who paints with temperature. The air drops a notch and then three. Your skin, still warm from labor, begins to give that warmth away. You don't have a coat, but you have a plan trap heat where it gathers. You move stones no bigger than a fist to form a low crescent along the windward edge of your mat. They're not a barrier so much as small anchors for your thatch if gusts try to flirt with it. You tuck extra grasses at your hip and ribs where blood close to the surface complains first. You promise your knees that tomorrow you'll look for bark to wrap like shin guards, courteous to thorns and unkind to cold. Your hands itch with the memory of tools you don't own. Mainstream fact to encourage your imagination. People as far back as the upper Paleolithic used bone awls and needles with eyes to stitch tight-fitting hides. That stitching kept drafts from hunting the body through seams. You don't have bone or awl yet, but you can rip and twist. You strip long fibers from a tough-leaved plant and learn their language. Some split clean and long, others snap in tantrums. You separate the good strands and roll them into cordage. Then use a simple overhand knot to tie your brush tighter where the wind rebounded rudely. Every knot you learn is a sentence in a dialect of weather. Your shoulders rub raw where the brush grazes each time you adjust. You think about smoke-softened hides, of how later people would brain-tan leather to keep it supple, and about how a well-smoked pelt resists rot and muffles the wind. Debate line to place on your shelf of unsolveds, historians still argue whether brain-tanning techniques were universally known in deep prehistory or developed regionally and intermittently. Either way, the alchemy of fat smoke and patience turned skin into shelter that could travel with you. For now, plant fiber and a stubborn will are your only jackets, and both thankfully come in your size. You lie on your mat for a test dose, eyes open, ears doing the listening, while your body practices being still. The cave mouth frames the sky like a rectangle of blue velvet deepening toward indigo. Bats scribble their freedom against it, 1, 2, 6, and your lips tilt at the small theater of it all. You rehearse your night movements without moving. If a rustle comes from the left, roll right and grab the rock. If a shadow crosses the opening, lift slowly to make yourself tall. If a breeze turns cold, feed the wall with another layer of thatch waiting at the ready. The mat warms under your hips by small increments, a promise that your earlier work is paying interest. Quirky practice for your lungs. Breathe low and slow into your belly, the way you would in a winter tent, to avoid hoarfrost on the inner wall. Warm air held longer warms you better. Air gulped fast is a burglar that steals heat and gives nothing back. You feel ridiculous for a second, then you feel warmer, and ridiculous can share the sleeping space if it earns its keep. You draw your knees closer and box your hands between them, turning your thighs into a pocket of protected air. Your body is a shelter too humble. Architecture you've carried all your life without reading the manual. You check the drip line again. By sound, no rain tonight, but habit is training. You pick 2 palm-sized stones as keepsakes, with jobs one smooth and flat for pressing cordage or pinning down a flap one knobby as a grater to roughen bark or scratch a warning notch into a branch. You resist the urge to build more. Night asks for margin, not monuments. Your wall is enough. You let the word settle like a friend beside you. There's one last housekeeping chore before darkness claims the stage. You gather your scraps, short stems, broken twigs, and shift them outside the sleeping zone. Order isn't about aesthetics. It's about not fumbling into pain in the dark. You make yourself a memory palace of 2 steps, reach left for cordage, right for rock. The simplicity feels like wealth. Joke 4 bonus, but hushed if future. You ever writes a home design blog, the first tip will be try not to share your bedroom with scorpions. The sky runs out of blue and finds its stars. Wind softens as the land cools. You tuck your ear against the mat and listen to the brush whisper a lullaby in a language of small frictions. For a thin golden minute, you allow yourself to admire the line you drew today, from exposed to edged, from sky swallowed to slope held, from target to tenant. The shelter won't win prizes. It will win time, and time is the currency that buys tomorrow's lessons. Firecraft, safe water, and all the rest of the work that makes alive a verb you can keep conjugating. You test your posture one last time, an animal wedded to exits, and then you agree with the dark on a truce you bring. Quiet, it brings rest. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a hyena calls in that chattering key, and your new wall makes a small smug sound as the breeze brushes it. You don't mistake less wind for no danger. You celebrate the modest miracle you built anyway, a corner of earth that answers your breath with a little warmth, and your fear with fewer edges. You sit in the lee of your brush wall and let the dusk cool your skin in tiny, careful steps, like a hand turning down a dimmer switch. The wind that bullied you earlier now moves in a polite hush. Your shelter answers with a soft rustle, proud of being enough. And then the night poses its oldest riddle without fire. How do you keep the cold out, the fear down, and the neighbors with big teeth on their side of the dark? Your answer has to be coaxed from wood breath, patience, and the kind of tiny physics that blister fingers and reward stubbornness. You inventory what you actually have. Tinder those silky dry grasses you scissored with your palms while building the wall, plus feathery seed heads from a brittle stalk that grew in last year's damp patch. Kindling pencil-thin dead twigs snagged in the lower ribs of an acacia snapped silently so nothing announces new tenant. Fuel wrist-thick branches mottled grey from long sunlight as promise, when you lift them dead dry and not likely to smoke like a tantrum. Tools your cordage braid from earlier, still surprisingly strong. 2 stones, one sharpish, where a flake split clean, one body smooth for pressing. And of course you 10 fingers, 2 lungs, one very motivated nervous system. You aim for friction fire because you have no pyrite and no steel, and lightning hasn't conveniently gift-wrapped a coal. The hand drill is the simplest if you can find the right marriage. A spindle of straight, dry, pithy wood and a fireboard, just a touch softer, so the dust you grind out wants to smolder rather than glaze. You test stems and dead branches the way a baker tests dough press, flex, listen. Acacia is tough and cranky. It wants to be a spear someday, not a spindle tonight. You search for lighter, deader, less resinous wood, something the termites tasted and declined because it dried too thoroughly. On the third try, your fingers close around a stem that snaps clean with a pithy heart and a sound like dry bread. The board comes from a wider flatter piece of the same shrub, its bark already peeling back like a polite invitation. You seat the spindle's tip in a shallow starter divot. You peck from the board with your chat au poison. You know what the books would tell you: roll fast, press down, keep the rhythm. The land, however, adds an appendix: keep your posture kind to your back, because pain makes you sloppy. Keep your breaths low and steady, or you'll spend all your heat on panic. You brace the board with one knee, the other leg extended, one foot pinning the board, as if it might try to escape, which, to be fair, it does regularly. You place your hands on the spindle and begin the roll, palms down, then forward and down again, trading skin for heat, patience for smoke. Within seconds, your palms argue. They prefer keyboards to sandpaper. You push through the first sting and focus on the little stove you are building by pure insistence. The spindle squeaks, then moans, then starts to hum a frequency you feel in your wrists. A donut of brown dust blooms around the socket. You stop to carve a notch that bites into the coal pocket, a place for the dust to slide and gather. Your sharp stone is barely sharp, but it's sharper than teeth, and that's plenty. You slide a dry sliver of bark under the notch to serve as a tray, then you roll again, feeling the dust thicken, darken, clump. The smoke this time has a smell that whispers almost. Mainstream fact to keep your hope honest. Archaeological traces from places like Wonderwork Cave and Gesher Benot Yaakov suggest that hominins were playing with fire long before modern humans. Painted bison, charred plant remains heat. Altered stone hearth like concentrations of ash. Evidence that controlled flame became a habit, not a miracle, hundreds of thousands of years back. Habit is the right word. Fire was never easy. It was practiced until it felt inevitable. And quirky tidbit to tuck beside that coal, you're coaxing a certain alpine mummy, much younger than the earliest fire makers, but still ancient to you, carried punky fungus to catch sparks and a kit to ferry embers. Proof that even when people could make fire, they still liked to keep fire by carrying it like a candle lit from a neighbor's candle, and guarded under bark and ash. Your hands slide too low. The spindle leaps free. You hiss a breath between teeth and watch the dust on your bark tray. It winks, maybe. You gently cup your hands around it and feed your breath in sips. It either blushes into an ember, a fragile cherry that eats dust for breakfast, or it sulks into black sand. It sulks. You accept the verdict like a student with a redo. Joke one soft so the hyena in the next county doesn't. SVPs. Great news, everyone. Fire is cancelling because my palms have filed a complaint with HR. You reset. A mouthful of water would help, but you're not gambling on the wash, and spit only goes so far. You pull your cordage from your waist and test an idea. A bow drill would spare your palms at the cost of slightly more engineering. You flex a greenish, springy branch into a half-moon tie, your braid to each end, and test the loop around your spindle. It bites. You need a handhold for the top of the spindle, something to press down without robbing the spin. Your smooth stone fits your palm, but it heats right away. You try a green knot of wood, slick with sap. It grudges friction where you want pressure, which is perfect. The contraption looks like a toy. It's actually a physics lesson with consequences. Historians still argue whether habitual fire-making arrived very early with Homo erectus or much later with structured hearths, becoming common only in recent slices of prehistory. For your purposes, the debate translates to some ancestors spent a lot of nights babysitting borrowed coals, and others got handier with friction and sparks. You are for now in the babysitting ember kindergarten. You place your knee in the board loop, the bow around the spindle seat, the spindles tip in your socket, and start the saw back and forth, even and low speed, second to steadiness. Smoke, there it is again, fuller now. The dust flows into your notch and piles on the bark like cinnamon. You pause only to deepen the notch a whisker, then drive again, this time with a bit more pressure. The smoke thickens into a ribbon, and when you stop, a thread of it keeps rising, good sign. You tap the board, and the dust cone slumps into itself, a tiny landslide. You bend, breath slow, whispering warmth. A seed of orange appears, no flame yet, just the idea of flame made visible. You feel a joy you didn't know your face could still make. You bring the bark tray to your tinder nest, as if carrying a sleeping baby that hates sudden moves. The nest is just grass and seed heads, and a curl of shredded inner bark teased into a bird's cradle that will cup heat and feed it without smothering. You tip the ember into the hollow and fold the nest around it, not crushing, just convincing fibers to hug. Then you breathe, not hard like a birthday wish, but slow, like you're coaxing a secret. Smoke sighs against your cheeks. The ember eats. The nest darkens. A tongue of yellow snaps out, doubts itself, and retreats. You lower your hands, angle the bundle so heat rises into fresh fiber, and give it another sip of breath. The flame returns. This time it stays. You don't set the bundle down in triumph. You've made that mistake in a past life. You place it into a pre-built teepee of pencil sticks, a tiny cathedral with just enough gaps to suck air and just enough walls to kiss the flame on all sides. You start with twigs, then step up to finger thick. Only when the structure lights its own edges do you introduce the wrist-thick pieces that will become coals. You choose a fire spot just outside the overhang mouth where smoke can climb cleanly and not turn your shelter into a cough. You keep a thumb's worth of soil handy to smother any runaway sparks, and your drip line doubles as a perimeter that says fire doesn't cross here. Mainstream fact, the kind that hums under every human story. Cooking fire changed bodies and time. Heat pre-digests tough plant fibers, and meat unlocking more calories per bite. It kills parasites that would happily migrate into you. It softens roots from gnawable to edible. Around a hearth, people stretched the day, telling and learning when the predators eased and the stars took attendance. Fire wasn't just warmth, it was a schedule, a circle, a school. Your little blaze answers with a crackle that feels like you've learned a new word you can't stop saying. Shadows tremble against the brush wall. Your shelter becomes a room. Jokes don't come easy out here, but one slips anyway, light as a moth. Congratulations on your new subscription, unlimited warmth. Trial, renewal depends on fuel attention and not wandering off. You grin privately and feed the fire downwind so smoke leans away from the sleeping mat. You experiment with smoke on purpose. A fistful of greener leaves plumps the plume, a trick you may use later to haze away insects or shout a signal that only your imaginary band will read. The flame replies with a crack and a sulk. Too wet. You pull the leaves back and return to honest, dry fuel. You angle 3 stones into a shallow U, not a ring, just a wind guide, and you notice how even a small reflector changes the fire's mood. You sit on the warm side, careful of popping seeds that shoot tiny comets into the dark. Quirky tidbit to pocket for the next camp. Some people's carried coals wrapped in punky wood, or in a wad of ash inside a bark tube, smouldering all day as they walked. So night never started from zero. Others peeled resin from certain trees to make slow candles, smoky but stubborn a pocket sun. Out here, you eye the sappy tears on a nearby shrub and make a note. Resin is torch starter glue and sometimes medicine. It is also very enthusiastic about clinging to fingers you meant to keep clean. You accept the trade. Suddenly your fire hiccups. A breeze noses the teepee and almost steals your smallest flames. You respond the way your ancestors did, by adding a feather stick you carve with a sharp flake. Shaving curls into a pencil-thick branch so it turns into a bouquet of tinder that catches easily. Your flake is crude and mean to your thumb, but the curls lift sip flame and gift it back to the larger sticks. You keep your kindling in 3 sizes in 3 little stacks. Order here isn't fussy, it's survival theatre. You are an actor hitting marks on a stage where the critic also has a mouthful of knives. Historians still argue whether smoky caves were always intentional classrooms of light and story, or whether some were work bays made uncomfortable by necessity and weather, with people choosing fresh air hearths whenever they could. The truth is likely both braided differently by place and season. Your truth tonight is simple. Outside where smoke lifts and eyes don't sting is nicer unless the hyenas decide the light means buffet. You shade your fire with your body and listen. The night answers with the world's oldest sound check, insects like rain on tin, a nightjar's syllables, the distant high-pitched chuckle that makes your shoulders remember to sit higher without asking permission. You resist the urge to build your blaze big. Big eats wood and advertises. Instead, you aim for bankable, a bed of coals that will glow like a sleeping cat ready to wake with one stick. You learn the small art of feeding the edges, not the center, and laying a log so that flame climbs slowly. not dumps its heat in a tantrum and sulks out. It feels like feeding a nervous guest, gentle, regular, never too much at once. When the core is coal, you stop fiddling. Your reward is a quiet, almost private warmth and a border of light that says to prowlers, try somewhere else. This one bites back with sparks. Joke too hushed, because even your laughter should go downwind. You hold your palms over the coals and whisper, I will. From now on, leave 5-star reviews for every working heater I ever meet. The coals hum their approval. A moth tests the light and decides you are not a flower. Good call, moth. Now you plan for the future, which in this era is sunrise. You arrange a pair of thicker sticks in a shallow V with their tips almost touching over the coals. Between them you tuck a modest shag of grass and the thinnest kindling, a tiny present to the dawn. You pull ash up and over part of the coal bed, tucking the fire in, as if you're putting a child to sleep. Banked like this, the burn slows and sulks, conserving its little red heart until morning breath gives it a reason to smile again. Your brain leans into possibilities. With fire-water changes, you could heat stones and drop them into a bark bowl if you had a bark bowl stone boiling that cooks without charring the container. Later cultures did it with baskets and skin bags. The stones do the work, not the flame. You don't have a container yet, so you trade the idea for a humbler plan. Tomorrow, you'll try an earth oven, hot stones in a pit food wrapped in leaves, soil over top steam, and time in partnership. Tonight you practice the first prerequisite, patience. Even hunger likes a lullaby. Mainstream fact to hang in the warm air between you and the fire. The evening hearth didn't only extend waking hours, it extended talking hours. That slack time under stars is where people compared notes. What the birds said before the rain, when the reindeer turned their coats, which plant turned tongues numb in a bad way versus a useful medicine way. Around coals, knowledge braided into story. Around coals, kids learned to hush when the nightjar called because it meant a cat was listening. You are alone, but you borrow the ritual anyway. You tell yourself the day not as a boast, but as a list of lessons you'll want again if tomorrow is generous. Quirky edge case to file under someday charred wood can be scribbler and sunscreen. Rub a little coal with fat when you have fat and your skin gets a dark, dull coat that either bugs or sun like less. Smear patterns if you're feeling ceremonial or practical. You grin at the thought of painting your cheeks like a warrior against mosquitoes. If your future haters are flies, flamboyance is function. Now the debate line that academics love and your fingers don't. Archaeologists still argue whether some of the oldest hearths in the record are truly hearths or the gift of wildfires and bat guano lit by chance with human activity, confused into the ashes later. You whisper back to the debate. Either way, thank you for the ash, while your hands tuck another feather of it over the sleeping coals. Argument aside, your fire is yours and it answers to breath and sticks, not to the seminar. The night audience checks in. A hyena far enough to be theory laughs in a scale that still visits your spine. You angle a thorn panel at the edge of your firelight, adding a pinch of obstacle to go with your pinch of bravado. Predators know the difference between prey that greets the dark and prey that negotiates with it. Light helps your side of the conversation, not a guarantee, just a clause. You slip your rock, the eye-aiming one, into easy reach. You will not sleep with a hand over the coals. That's how people wake up without eyebrows. You will sleep with a plan. Joke 3, as gentle as a coal's sigh. You look at your tiny camp, the brush wall, the sleeping mat, the banked ember, and whisper, open concept living, minimalist, hyena adjacent, starting bid, one dry twig. The stars, terrible negotiators, offer nothing in return but their cold, extravagant shine. You tip your head back and let your breath slow to match the fire's slower rhythm. In the half-lit cusp before sleep, a memory arrives that isn't yours, but belongs to anyone who ever sat where you sit, a circle of faces reflecting orange. Someone feeding a bit of fat to the flame and telling a story about how the kudu got its stripes, or why the moon loves to look at rivers. The content doesn't matter. The shape does. The circle says together. Alone you echo it anyway, a soft hum, a few syllables of a made-up lullaby. The promise that tomorrow you'll try to find a band whose circle will return your hum. You stretch your feet toward the low heat and mark the edges of caution. Fire can bite you in two ways, too close or too far. Too close ember pops that land on a grass mat and teach you the lesson about clearing a bare patch. You've cleared one, good student. Too far, wandering away from the heat at 3 a.m. because you dreamed you were a comet. You anchor yourself with a simple rig, a longer stick resting on your shin, so that if you roll, it knocks against your other leg and wakes you before you slide fully out of warmth. It's not a gadget, it's a nudge. A last practical whisper to yourself if the wind shifts rude at midnight. Rotate the V-sticks so their tips still face a friendly draft. If the coals sulk, pull back the ash a little and feed them a pine cone-sized bundle of the thinnest twigs. Don't blow hard, breathe like you're trying not to wake a friend. If a spark wanders near the brush wall, smother, don't swat, your hand makes wind, and wind loves to give bad ideas wings. When your eyes finally close, it isn't bravado that lets them. It's craft, beginner's craft, but craft nonetheless. You read wood like a shy textbook and turned it into heat. You turned heat into courage. You turned courage into a measurable improvement in odds. Your shelter sighs, the coals purr, the sky keeps its cold and you keep your warmth, and the line between those two empires is the width of your hand, cupped in the memory of a flame you coaxed into being. Tomorrow will be hunger and water, and if you're wise, more humility. Tonight is a small fire and a smaller smile. You turn on your side, make a pillow from your forearm, and let the long muscles of your back thaw fiber by fiber. Your last thought before the thin, necessary sleep is half promise, half prayer. Keep the ember. Everything else can be negotiated with daylight. Dawn edits the sky from charcoal to pearl, and your little ember wakes exactly the way you asked, one breath, then another, then a shy flame. Warmth lifts the stiffness from your back, but hunger is not impressed by your firecraft. It wants a plan. Last night you promised yourself you'd think like the land, not like a movie. So you don't grab a stick and sprint after the first antelope-shaped blur. You study. Hunting. Your discovering isn't a stunt, it's a calendar set to animal time. You ease to your lookout 2 steps above the wash, never inside it, and watch the morning commute. Hoofed feet choose lines the way rivers do, repeating old decisions until they become grooves in the ground and in memory. You sketch the routes in your head, a narrow place between thorn thickets, a twist where the dry bank undercuts the flat, a slope that looks gentle until it tips steeper behind a blind. None of this is to make you feel clever. It's to confirm a larger truth. Single hunters sometimes score, but patterns feed people. Mainstream fact to lace into your empty stomach. Archaeologists have found mass kill sites and drive lines where hunters used terrain. Natural narrows, shallow gullies, even low fences of brush and stone to funnel moving herds into close quarters. The kill itself wasn't the only masterpiece. The timing was spring and autumn migrations, moonlight, bright enough to travel by winds that hid human scent. That's the cultural side of hunting, not the spear, but the clock it points to. You alone on your first morning of competence are not a clock. You are the new kid in a school with strict hall passes. Still, you practice pieces. You read fresh tracks, comparing the crispness of edges where dew hasn't had time to soften them. You squat and lay a palm near a pellet, its body warm, close. You freeze, let a breath fade into the brush, and angle your way to micro-high ground, the termite dome again, the savannah's favorite stool. From there you try what every beginner tries, stalking a guinea fowl you have no business stalking. You fail, of course, flustered, birds explode, like thrown confetti, and you grin despite the hunger, because the lesson sticks approach from the sun. Break your outline, move only when the heads go down. Joke one hushed you, award yourself most improved bush for your ability to stand very still and pretend to be shrubbery. You roll your shoulders and consider persistence hunting, the midday endurance chase. Some groups in hot open country still practice the human superpower of sweating where other mammals pant until they overheat. It's elegant strategy biology, turning the sun into a teammate. It's also a terrible solo plan for you. Right now you lack water, you lack conditioning, and you lack a support crew to circle with a skin of drink and a cheer. When your hamstrings write their resignation letters. Hunting is a relay, not a selfie. Quirky tidbit to file next to your ribcage. Some hunters in later times wore simple animal masks or capes when stalking antelope headpieces. Bird silhouettes, not magic, just camouflage that tricked a glance long enough to buy a step. Whether or not such disguises walked these plains in your chosen slice of prehistory, the idea carries animals' red outlines more than details. Your outline needs rehearsal. Historians still argue whether the earliest projectile systems here were mostly thrown by hand, accelerated with spear throwers, or loosed by bow. Whatever the kit, the key was coordination, lookouts on ridges, drivers on flanks, ambushers where the terrain narrowed, signalers reading wind and hooves like music. You practice a signal with no one to receive it, 2 clicks of tongue, then a whistle on an inhale. All you manage is a squeak that startles a lizard into laughter. Fine, the lizard has notes on your technique. You pivot from catch an animal to understand an animal. Antelope herds graze with a cadence, heads down, heads up, heads swivel. You time your blinks to their heads, absurd as that sounds, because blinking is movement too. You count steps between mouthfuls. You mark which bush made them detour by a meter and which thorn thicket they trusted enough to skirt. That list in your head gets longer, and for the first time this morning, you feel less like a tourist and more like a student who might pass a quiz if the teacher is generous. Late morning stretches thin and bright. You rehearse what a real drive would look like if you had a band. You'd place 2 people where the wash tightens one on each bank to block the easy exit with noise and waving branches. Upwind a pair would drift like ghosts, letting their smell warn the herd in a direction you've chosen, not the herd. Along the flanks, walkers would thrum brush with sticks, thup, 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 comfortably annoying. Never panicked, guiding without stampeding. The lead team would hold very still until the last minute, then step out, large, calm, inevitable, closing the map to a funnel so short the spear is almost an afterthought. None of that is solo. All of it is culture. Mainstream anchor to harden that sketch in many paleo environments. Hunters stacked knowledge across years when the reindeer shed velvet, where the wild horses cut the valley, which slope iced first in early frost. Evidence of repeated seasonal use at some sites, layer upon layer of hearths, butchery debris, tools repaired and re-repaired. Reads like a ledger. We were here in this month doing this again because it works. It only works because we shows up. You negotiate with your appetite using a different currency, small game. A hare spooks from the edge of a shrub, white tail flagging your incompetence as you lunge too late. You breathe reset and go tiny traps, not throws. You twist cordage into a noose that could, with the right funnel of sticks, catch a bird or an incautious hyrax. You plant nothing, yet you need bait and better placement. But the practice matters. A dozen simple snares, checked regularly, can feed a group in a way a single failed chase never will. Culture, again, less glory, more groceries. Quirky tidbit, half practical, half delightful bone whistles and flute fragments turn up in upper Paleolithic layers. Music older than most nations, which may have been more than lullabies. Sound carries signals. Start the drive, hold the line shift left, coded into tunes no antelope recognizes as instructions. Whether your specific ancestors sang their strategies at sunrise or simply hummed to feel brave rhythm helps people move as one. You hum now 2 notes, lazy as a nap, and discover your feet adopt a quieter pace just to match it. There's a debate line to drop into your running commentary. Scholars still argue whether some mass bone piles represent coordinated hunts or opportunistic scavenging at natural traps, animals funneling themselves off cliffs or into mud they couldn't escape while humans arrived to finish a job. Gravity started. Either way, the lesson holds. The clever bit isn't the finishing stroke. It's showing up at the right place when the land decides the moment is ripe. You can swing a stick all day, The valley only sets a table a few dates each year. You squat and sketch with a twig, a V of brush here, a decoy line there, a person on that knuckle of rock. You practice reading wind again, the invisible ink that writes success across your face or failure across your scent. With no one to coordinate, your rehearsal is pantomime, but your brain is carving channels it will use if you ever find your people. Joke 2. Light as chaff, you consider making a sign. Bandmate wanted must enjoy long walks, quiet hand signals and not dying. Your hunger has its own ideas. It suggests bravery, masquerading as impatience. You remind it that a thrown rock at a nervous antelope becomes a sprint measured in meters and disaster. A thrown rock at a guinea fowl perched too low could be dinner. You adjust your ambitions accordingly, and you practice an old trick you only read about in your bloodstream, waiting. Not still like a statue, still like a plant adjusting leaves to light without rustling. When the shadow of a raptor ripples the ground and the small birds hush, you hush too. Not because the raptor threatens you, but because the hush might tell you where the next movement will be. By afternoon, the land's heat is a hand pressed between your shoulder blades. You back into the narrow shade of your overhang and turn hunting thoughts from now to next. A successful day's take isn't just meat, it's management. You picture the racks you'd lash from branches, the thin strips you'd slice along the grain, the smoke bank you'd tend to turn red flesh into dark, safe food. Tough, yes, but weeks of calories if protected from claws and damp. Mainstream fact to stitch into that daydream, drying and smoking, extend the life of food well beyond the kill. Caches meat hung in trees, buried in cool pits, stored in rock crevices, let groups ride lean seasons. The skill isn't just killing, it's keeping. You try a micro version with what little you've got. A few edible insects coaxed from beneath a damp log. Yes, you make a face. No, the face does not change the protein math. Speared on a sliver and held over the coals, they pop and brown and taste vaguely like toasted nuts, if your imagination is cooperative. You don't pretend it's a feast. You do celebrate a win that required no sprinting and no hero story. Joke 3, as gentle as your appetite, you declare your pop-up restaurant Savannah Tapas and award it 2 stars for convenience, deducting 3 for ambiance and the rude hyena review echoing from beyond the ridge. Later, you walk your imaginary drive again, this time looking for the chores no one sings about, repairing the drive lines after a storm, moving stones someone kicked, collecting the teaching sticks elders used to draw routes in dust for kids whose legs were still short. Culture is maintenance disguised as tradition. That idea comforts you more than you expected. You realize how many times in your modern life you paid for something once and expected it to work forever. Out here, everything demands a subscription paid in attention. Here's your debate phrase tucked under the shade with you archaeologists still argue whether certain clusters of enigmatic baton objects from the deep past were spear straighteners, status items, or multi-tools. Whatever they were, they point to a toolkit that didn't separate practical from symbolic like we do. A straight spear flies truer. A decorated tool says, "Who taught you to make it?" Both matter when your dinner runs on legs. Quirky detail to grin at, while you plan some hunters then, and much later masked human scent with smoke, or smeared themselves with mud, crushed leaves, even animal dung. Less about perfume, more about not announcing walking meat. Aisle 2 when the wind shifts wrong. You don't have the heart yet to roll in hyena eau de toilette, but you do sit downwind of your own smoke for a minute, letting it paint your hair and skin with something wilder than citrus shampoo. You refuse to romanticize a chase. Instead, you picture the part after the quiet, grim skill of butchering with respect and speed, choosing what to carry to camp first, because heat isn't your friend. The heavy quarters can wait if you rescue the fragile, nutrient-rich bits, the organs that turn bad first, which also turn strength into you fastest. Alone, you wouldn't manage half of it before heat or visitors barged in. Together, you could move like a practiced machine. Cut, carry, guard, watch. Every role learned by heart, swapped as needed. No speeches. By late afternoon, you set yourself a practical, humble aim. Build 2 real snares in places that might forgive a beginner. You choose runways. Small animals actually use tunnels under grass gaps between roots. Then shape gentle guide sticks so the path narrows just where your noose hangs. You anchor each line to a springy branch that will lift a caught foot and keep teeth from chewing through escape. You mark the spots with a personal code, a broken twig laid a certain way so you can find them at dawn, without broadcasting to everything else that food might be waiting. Will they work tonight? Maybe not. But your hands learn more from stringing 2 snares than from throwing 10 rocks. You close the day by testing your throw at a fixed target, an old knot on a trunk, because accuracy isn't a talent. It's repetition until the motion can happen while your brain is busy with wind and angles. You miss a lot. You miss less. A small muscular satisfaction settles under your ribs that has nothing to do with romance and everything to do with paying attention on purpose. The sun lowers, the air softens. Your little camp takes you back without commentary, exactly as welcoming as the work you've put into it. Before dark, you stage tomorrow's plan near the coals, feather sticks, a new tinder nest, and beside them, your 2 wake sticks laid in a shallow V so you can revive the banked heart without rummaging. You check snares once more, empty as expected, and whisper a promise to the land you intend to keep. You'll take slowly, learn quickly, waste nothing. If luck and patience introduce you to a band, you'll trade your small collection of beginner's tricks for their library of seasons and rotes. That's the real hunt you're on, and you know it now. You settle on your mat not triumphant, just less naive. If someone asked what you did today, your answer wouldn't fit a highlight reel. You drew invisible fences in your head. You timed a bird's hop. You taught your hand to roll fiber into string. You made 2 loops in the grass that might buy you breakfast. That's the secret you wish the romantic brochures had told you. Hunting at its heart is a long conversation with a place, and places only speak to people who listen longer than they brag. Your fire answers the first star with a soft exhale. In that quiet, you let one last thought turn over slow as a log, Catching hero stories end at the moment of the throw. Culture stories begin there, drying racks, smoke sharing teaching. You choose the second kind of story, even if your cast is only you and a hopeful ember. Sleep comes easier when the narrative doesn't require a miracle at dawn, just another day of turning up, noticing, and doing the next small right thing. Hunger wakes first tapping your ribs like a polite woodpecker. The fire gives you a warm yes, but your stomach wants nouns, roots, shoots, seeds, anything that won't file a poisoning complaint. You step beyond the overhang with the same scan you use for predators, except now the danger hides in leaves shaped like promises. Forage your brain suggests as if that's a beginner button you can push. Out here, foraging is not the eat the green stuff montage. It's a library, and every book has a look-alike whose plot twist is hospital. You kneel by a patch of broad leaves beaded with dew. Let your fingers hover and then do the most Stone Age thing you've done, yet nothing. You don't eat because you feel like you've seen this plant on a blog. You wait. You map the microhabitat, soil dampness, shade companion plants because edibles are picky about address. You sniff the stem. It's sharp, carroty, citrusy, bitter. None of those alone mean safe. You rub a leaf on your wrist, wait a minute, and your skin tingles in a way that says, we could have a debate about this later. You believe it. The universal edibility test that modern survival guides whisper about is not a magic spell. It is a long, cautious ritual that buys you small answers over hours, not confidence at lunchtime. Mainstream fact to respect. While your appetite pouts early, hunter-gatherers didn't browse random salads. They recognized dozens of species, sometimes 50 or more across seasons, and they knew the timing, the part, and the prep spring shoots, but not summer leaves. Roasted seeds, but not raw pods. Peeled tuber, but not milky sap. That knowledge traveled mouth to mouth, story to song, and you were supposed to inherit it, not improvise it before noon. The romance of a wild bowl fades. The respect for a grandmother's plant song grows. You shift to targets with louder tells. Grasses heavy with seed are a safer start than mystery leaf salad. You strip a handful into your palm, blow away chaff and chew carefully. Some seeds are sweet and nutty, some soap. Your mouth with saponin's foam that says rinse me, parch me, or regret me. You spit rinse with a measured sip from water you boiled. You did boil, you cautious genius, and move on. Joke one light as husk. You promise that if you ever meet spinach again, you will not bully it with dressing. Spinach has done years of training you didn't appreciate. A cattail stand near the damp hollow draws your eye. Even here, where the watercourse is mostly wishful thinking, the low spots keep a secret stash of moisture. Cattail, if that's what it is, can be a multi-tool young spring, shoots for crunch, rhizomes for starch, and in the right season, pollen like golden dust you can shake into a bag and treat as flour. You aren't in that season for pollen, but you test the shoot tip on one plant, careful not to yank the whole stand like a vandal. The taste is clean, almost cucumber. You take only what you can justify. Now the land throws you a pop quiz, an umbel. a spray of small white flowers arranged in a pretty disc, the kind that makes people think wild carrot and then meet its evil twin. Umber-lifers hold both friend and assassin caraway and carrot on one shelf, water hemlock and poison hemlock on another, their stems dotted and streaked with the sort of art that should come with a skull icon. You admire from a respectful distance. If you have to ask, the answer is no. You are not auditioning for an ancient cautionary tale, quirky but practical tidbit to file some foragers and even non-human primates practice geophagy, eating certain clays which can bind plant toxins and soothe an angry gut. That's not a license to lick every mud pie on the savannah, but it explains why a pocket of fine, clean clay in a known spot becomes a hush-hush remedy station in some traditions. The fact that it sounds odd to your modern ear doesn't make it less useful when a mouthful of saponin-rich leaves decides to stage an opera. Historians still argue whether Paleolithic diets leaned meat-heavy or plant-heavy in different regions and seasons. What they don't argue is that plants weren't garnish, starch granules trapped in ancient calculus, on teeth, grinding stones pebbled smooth by years of seed work and cook pits, perfumed by singed tubers, all hummed the same refrain, knowing plants was survival's other half. You are late to class, but the school is open every morning and tuition is patience. You need a digging stick, the humble wand that turns maybe into calories. You choose a shoulder-high branch with a tough spine char, its tip in your coals, then scrape it on stone to a wedge that isn't sharp so much as stubborn. This is the prehistoric butter knife that goes through dirt. With it, you work at the base of a plant that wears the right clues. Low-habit leaves that thicken near the ground, and a faint starch smell where you nick the root. You pry gently so you don't shatter food into soil confetti. The earth sighs, then gives you a knobbly tuber the color of old bone. You do not bite it. You slice off a sliver with your sharpest stone and hold it to heat until it blisters. Roasting can disarm irritants and tannins that laugh at raw mouths. The sliver cools. You taste earthy, not bitter, a hint of sweetness promising. 2 more slivers and no fireworks in your lips or throat. You roast the whole tuber, then peel it like a hot stone. Finger pads burning in a useful way. Starch arrives like a friend you thought moved away. It's not triumph, it's rent paid to the afternoon. Mainstream anchor. Long before fields wore fences, people parched seeds, leached tannins from acorns, peeled toxic skins from roots, and roasted bulbs to change their chemistry. Fire plus water plus time, those are the verbs that turn inedible into everyday. You don't have a pot yet, but you can hack together, leaching with patience, slice thin, soak in repeated changes of water or drip water through a grass bundle over slices, set in a woven pouch, then cook. It's labor, yes, but labor is a recipe as old as the first hunger. The umbellifer worry won't let go, so you lean into lookalikes again. Wild parsnip's pretty face can blister skin with phototoxins if its sap meets sunlight on you. Wild carrot can be safe when right and heartbreak when wrong. Water hemlocks, streaked stems, chambered root, and mousy smell are not a riddle you need to solve solo. You file a rule you'll keep. If it lives in the parsley family and you're not carrying your grandmother's plant song in your head, skip it. You are not here to become a case study. Joke 2 whispered to your future self. One day, if you ever design a foraging app, it will have exactly one button, call grandma, and one alert. If it looks like a salad but smells like a pharmacy, keep walking. You pivot to low-risk, medium reward. Flowering sorrel, if that's what this arrow-leafed patch is, brings oxalic acids bright sour. A nibble is fine. A handful every hour is a kidney's hate mail. You sample the tiniest bite, decide rainbow spritz of lemon is a nice garnish on roasted tuber and move on. You strip a sleeve of grass seeds and toast them on a hot stone to fake a micro loaf, crunchy, smoky, faintly sweet. If you believe in nice things, you do. For 8 seconds. Quirky image to tuck into your inner field guide. Cattail pollen season turns the air gold. Tapped into a pouch, it behaves like flour bound with a smear of roasted tuber or a mash of other seeds into flat cakes that taste like the sun has a pastry chef. Not today, but soon if you track seasons like you track hyenas. You consider honey the galaxy's original candy bar. Wild hives hum in rock cracks and hollow trunks. Smoke will calm the guard line and make the foragers drunk on their own chemistry. With a torch and a flat stone, you could sneak a comb. But honey raids are loud and sticky and smell like please. Visit me larger neighbors so you demote sugar fantasies to later with friends. Your fire's gentle smoke does one job now. Your clothes drink it in, masking the mammal note you wear like cologne. Historians still argue whether early grinding stones from some sites mark regular cereal processing or occasional opportunistic seed feasts. Either way, your tongue doesn't care which academic wins. It cares that roasted and slightly ground grass seed mixed with a splash of hot water becomes a porridge that coats emptiness. You improvise a bark on stone mash, stirring with a twig, blowing like a patient kettle. It's not pretty. It is, however, food. You eat slowly, not because you're savoring, but because wolfing hot starch burns lips and hope. Now you sew a kit from tiny pieces, a palmful of toasted seeds, 3 tubers roasted and cooled, 2 handfuls of safe greens you can name by the crease of their leaves and the taste that won't quit. A twist of cordage to hang bundles high from ants and low from birds. You tuck a slim digging stick behind the brush wall like a broom. You layer hot stones in a shallow pit to try a pocket oven tonight. Tuber leaf wrap, soil cap, and nod at the fact that you've started cooking like a chorus instead of a soloist. Heat above heat, below patience, all around. Mainstream fact to steady the pride without inflating its starch residues show up on tools older than many myths. Grains, roots, even wild barley, ground and possibly cooked into something resembling a flatbread, long before wheat fields were a gleam in agriculture's eye. Your hands hum along that timeline now, clumsy but in tune. One day that tune becomes a song you can teach. Today it's a warm mumble under your breath. The quirky factor you grin at because absurdity keeps company with wisdom out here. Ash is seasoning and medicine. A pinch of clean wood ash in water makes a mild lie. Too much is trouble. Just enough helps strip hulls from seeds or soften the bite of astringent plants. You are not doing chemistry in a lab. You are borrowing what cooks everywhere, learned by accident and then by design. You lay a fingertip of ash on your tongue, tiny bitter, then gone, and decide to save that experiment for a moment when supervision looks less like a hyena. Debate line to dangle like an amulet from your cordage. Historians still argue whether self-medication with plants bitters for parasites, tannin-rich bark for diarrhea, smoke from specific leaves for respiratory ease was intentional or incidental in deep prehistory. Residues in ancient mouths suggest knowledge. Skeptics counter that eating the whole environment will put a pharmacy on your teeth by accident. You practical and hungry settle on a simple truth. Either way, the people who noticed patterns and told stories about them left more descendants than those who didn't. So you promise to notice and to tell. You set aside a quiet hour for library time, repeated visits to the same patch of land to watch plants age. Sprouts become leaves, leaves become stalks, stalks become flowers and then seeds. The same plant moves through a suite of forms that could fool you if you only meet it once. You choose 3 candidates to apprentice yourself to the cattail at the hollow's lip, the grass whose seed cooks without soap, the little sour leaf that brightens tuber. You practice their names out loud, not Latin, just your own memory tags: candle in mud, toast, grass lemon leaf. You whisper to them in the voice you used last night for the fire. The savannah does not mind. The savannah prefers students who talk less and learn more. Joke 3, feather soft. You compose the world's tiniest cookbook, Stone Age salads with legal waivers, and dedicate it to the grandmother you wish you could borrow for a week. You tidy your gathering in ways that would pass an elder's inspection. You don't rip stands bare. You spread your picking across patches. You leave the youngest and the seed heavy to their own business. You never take the first plant you meet in case it's the only one here. You place a few seeds near your camp's damp edge, not because you're inventing agriculture this afternoon, but because nudging a useful plant closer is a kind of future note to yourself. People have been writing those notes for a very long time, long before plots had fences. Before dusk, you circle past your 2 snares from yesterday, because food is an orchestra and you're now humble enough to play triangle. 1 snare has sprung and trapped a tuft of grass. The other sits as you set it, exquisitely patient. You reset both, adjust the funnels and mark with your quiet code. No drama, no trumpet, just the work. Back at camp, you try your first earth oven micro-batch tuber, wrapped in leaves tucked under warmed soil and stones. While the heat settles in, you crush toasted seeds between stones and sprinkle the grits into hot water in a shallow rock hollow, stirring until the liquid thickens into honest porridge. You tear 2 leaves of lemon leaf and drop them in at the end for brightness. The tuber emerges steaming and sweet. The porridge is a spoonless affair. You pinch and sip from the rock with the patience of a cat. Somewhere a hyena comments on your menu with the usual laugh. You answer by not wasting a speck. When you finally lean back against your brush wall, you feel full in a way that isn't only stomach. You listened and were rewarded. You refused a guess and were rewarded again. The ground has started telling you its grocery schedule this now, that later, never that one. Your pride is quiet and serviceable. You are not a foraging prodigy. You are a person who didn't poison yourself today. In the Stone Age, that's not a joke, it's a credential. Your last task before night is to stash a portion high in a crook and low behind a rock, two small caches because one is an invitation for disaster. You smudge both with a pinch of ash to blur the scent trail and arrange thorny twigs around the base. Not hyena-proof, but hyena-annoying, which sometimes buys the minutes between stolen and still yours. You bank your coals with the tenderness of last night and lay out tomorrow's questions beside your feather sticks. Each question has a plant's face now. That's progress you can taste. You sleep with the ease of someone who learned 3 plant names and lived to try a 4th. Tomorrow you'll walk the same ground and see different things because that's how this works. Repetition turns a hostile encyclopedia into a friendly pamphlet, and then if you're lucky and humble, into a family story. You wake with the small victory of not being someone else's breakfast, and the larger problem of not becoming your own worst enemy. Teeth and claws announce themselves. The real villains whisper. A scratch across your knuckles from yesterday's brushwork looks like nothing a pale punctuation mark in dust. But you know the rumor about this place, tiny doors, invite big trouble. So you begin the day not with a chase, but with a cleanup. You warm a shallow rock in the coals, tilt a palm-sized puddle of yesterday's boiled water onto it, and let heat climb to the edge of a simmer again. You rinse the wound, not scrubbing, like a guilty plate, just letting warmth float, grit out, and patience take what pride usually guards. You don't have cloth, but you have options, a strip of softer inner bark, rinsed and dried by the fire. A tuft of clean grass twisted into something like a wick. Even a smear of resin that glues edges together and keeps the world from walking in. Resin stings, resin smells, resin works. You breathe through the sting and think about the list your elders would chant: clean cover, keep change often. 4 short verbs that are secretly a shield. Mainstream fact to ground the caution long before towns crowded pathogens elbow to elbow. People carried infections in their mouths and blood. Ancient teeth hold microscopic fossils of old fevers and mouth bacteria that read like a ghost medical chart. Cuts weren't metaphors, they were invitations. Your morning becomes a lesson in polite refusals. You store dirty hand and clean hand as ideas switching tasks, so you don't go from butchering fantasy to bandage in one move. It feels fussy. It is fussy. It's also how you keep your knuckles. Water is the other quiet gamble. The wash beckons a silver ribbon you want to trust. You don't. You collect away from tracks where the bank isn't freckled with hoof stamps, dipping mid-column, if there's any flow, and never scraping the bottom, where silt does its gossip. Then you do what saves lives in every era with patience. To spare you make it roll. You rig hot stones again, scooped from the coal bed with a branch, and dropped into your bark-lined depression until the water shivers like it's remembering the sea. Bubbles stitch across the surface. You let them sow for longer than your thirst wants. When you drink, it's careful. When you store, it's sealed under a flat stone, like a promise. Joke one floats up light as foam. You christen your system with a fancy cafe name, Stone-Boiled Reserve, and refuse to serve anyone who can't present exact change in the form of patience. Invisible enemies travel on feet too small for your eyes. Worms curl inside untreated water or nest in undercooked meat. Tiny protozoa throw parties in ponds that only look friendly. Mosquito spit is an ancestral pen pal you don't want to write back. You treat your skin like a border ash at the ankles and wrists to discourage biters' smoke in your hair, so you smell less like fresh single mammal sleeves and leggings from wrapped bark once you finish lashing them shut with your new cordage. You choose camp with drainage in mind. You don't nap beside standing water, no matter how perfect the shade. Everything you do is a love letter to your immune system, which bless it trained for a different century. Quirky tidbit to hang beside your water jug honey, when you can risk a raid to get it, isn't just dessert, it's a sticky shield, packed into a small cut or smeared across a scraped shin. It draws moisture from bacteria and makes a bad neighborhood for infection. Not a miracle, not a cure-all, but the kind of kitchen magic grandmothers smile about while they pretend it's nothing. You add sweet medicine to the list of things to try when you're not alone and not being heckled by hyenas. Historians still argue whether disease loads spiked mainly after agriculture packed people and animals close, or whether paleolithic groups had their own miserable share of fevers and worms. You don't need the verdict to act like both are true. Small groups spread less. The wild still breathes its own newspapers of microbes through the grass. So you thread your day with new rituals that look like superstition to anyone who hasn't read the fine print of survival latrine well downwind and far downstream, hands rinsed after not before. Food lifted from ground and never stored where ants write the inventory. The sun climbs and you remember last night's vow to be more plant than hero. You lean your digging stick and bring out your clean hand to check the knuckle. The resin has gone glassy. The edges sit quietly together like neighbors who found a boundary. You nod to the tiny victory and pour yourself a generous thimble of stone-boiled reserve. Everything tastes like smoke and relief. You set about making a filter, not because it replaces boiling, but because it makes boiling faster and kinder to your throat. You choose a length of hollow reed and pack it in layers, a cap of coarse grass to catch the twigs, a band of sand to catch the silt, a cushion of powdered charcoal scraped from yesterday's cooled coals to swallow tastes and some mischief too. Then another veil of grass to keep the black from sprinting into your cup. The reed looks like nothing. It's actually a slow argument with the river. When you pour your next fetch through it, the water leaves its grudges behind. You test more mosquito deterrents. Smoke is the headliner. Smudgy fires make clouds that insects would rather not read. Smeared ash dulls skin scent and makes the landing less appealing. If you find a handful of fresh green leaves that don't scream poison, You crush and dab the oils at pulse points. Plant perfumes don't erase mammal, but they invite a mosquito to reconsider its dinner plans. You wait for dusk because dusk is the hour when small wings clock in. If the swarm arrives, you add damp leaf to the fire to thicken smoke, and you sit in the plume, eyes half closed, a lizard in a sauna. Your body is the next frontier. You tally the aches, the weird twinge behind a rib, the bone tired that might just be dehydration, hiding in grumpy clothes. You turn your porridge into medicine by stirring in a pinch of salt you scraped from dried mud crusts miles back, carefully tasted and more carefully rationed, or by boiling a handful of salty plant if you're lucky enough to meet one. You watch your urine like it's a weather report. Too dark is a storm on the way. You sip earlier than you want because thirst is a late letter. Mainstream anchor to whisper over your shoulder. Boiling water kills the worst of the usual suspects. Bacteria and parasites that don't like spa days. Clear moving water upstream of animal traffic is safer than still, but not safe by default. Hot stones into bark bowls, stone-lined pits, or tight-woven baskets turn a camp with no pot into a kitchen anyway. The world you inhabit will reward people who keep their water polite. You decide to be one of those people. Now you walk your campsite as if you've never seen it. You relocate the butchering zone you haven't used yet to the far side of a breeze so bone dust doesn't join your soup. You shift your stores off the ground onto a fork in the rock wall where ants have to work for a living. You move your sleeping mat a hand's width farther from the brush edge because spiders are also tenants and you'd rather not share a pillow. You declare the first 2 arms lengths inside your shelter, no raw space, no raw plant, no raw meat, no raw ego, so that your knuckle dressing remains the only drama in there. Joke 2, soft and drowsy. You draft a sign for the cave mouth in your head. Welcome to hygiene population, one paperwork constant. You practice don't cross the streams, which is not just a movie line. Clean hand tasks live in one bucket, bandages water the cooking stick. Dirty hand tasks in another, gutting, scraping, pouring through soil and memory. You rotate which hand is which, so one doesn't fall off from boredom, and you tighten the rule that tasks never swap without a rinse. This is fussy. This is the point. You still trip once, reach for your lip with the wrong fingers, and you pull the hand away like it belongs to a stranger. Good. Suspicion is an organ now. Quirky but true, a pinch of crushed charcoal rubbed gently on teeth won't replace dentistry, but it polishes, deodorizes, and gives your tongue something new to complain about besides thirst. Later, when you have more cordage and a scrap of soft hide, you'll add a chew stick to your kit, a twig with fibers teased out at one end into a brush. People have been doing this a lot longer than toothpaste commercials. You grin at the thought of a hyena peering in to say, your smile looks adequate. The sun melts toward evening and you think about parasites again, not with horror, but with policy. Thorough cooking becomes the rhythm fish until its flakes fall with no argument. Meat until juices lose their bright crisped edges. Roots until their bite turns into soft and not numb. You choose not to taste just a little of anything raw, with a pedigree you can't prove. You accept that food takes time and that time is a seatbelt you wear even when the road is empty. Historians still argue whether the old friends we evolved with gut worms, soil microbes, bitey neighbors kept our immune systems busy in ways that made allergies scarce. The modern world, cleaner and stranger, invites our defenses to overreact like bored guards. That's a debate for softer chairs. You take one idea from it into the dark, your body recognizes old enemies better than new ones. Let the ancient practices fire, clean, water, distance from waste be your translators. Night raises the volume on the small things. A mosquito's whine is a violin string drawn across your patience. You bank your coals and build a smudge on purpose, a slow exhale of smoke that folds itself around your ankles. You redraw your no-raw border in your head and place your bandage kit, the bark strips, a bit of resin, a pinch of ash for dry scabs within reach where sleepy hands won't have to negotiate an obstacle course. You stretch your legs and check for the bites you didn't feel when you were busy. Most are small. One is a swollen badge at the calf. You press the edge to see if heat blooms. It doesn't. You breathe out. You repair your knuckle wrap and think about redundancy. When a band travels, someone carries fire, someone carries fibers, someone carries the bundled herbs that make upset stomachs less theatrical. Alone, you become a small band by repetition. 2 ways to boil, 2 ways to dress 2 caches. If you press your ear to the dark carefully, you can almost hear an elder counting with you 2, 2, backing your caution with the weight of years. Mainstream fact to steady your ritual's latrines, dug a handspan or 2 deep, far from water and sleeping, covered after each use, keep flies from turning bodily stories into everyone's business. Hands rinsed in boiled or filtered water before food aren't manners, they're math. Camps that do this see fewer fevers, nights grow quieter. You picture the line of footprints from your sleeping mat to your latrine, neat and unshowy, and feel a private pride that is as warm as your fire. There's a debate line you roll on your tongue like a small stone. Some argue that paleolithic mobility diluted disease camps, moved waste, dispersed, a fever flickered and went out. Others point to close sleeping, shared tools, and the stubborn tenacity of certain bugs that hitchhike in skin folds and blankets, insisting that sickness kept pace, no matter how many miles passed under human heels. You decide again that the argument is interesting and irrelevant to the next 10 minutes. Your job is to reduce invitations, quirky glint to carry into the hush cobwebs, make a serviceable bandage in a pinch. They're clean if you harvest from the right corner and press them into a cut as a gauze that breathes and stiffens. Romantic? Not really. Effective, often enough to be worth the shiver. You pluck a small veil from a high, dustless nook, fold it like a napkin, and tuck it with your bark strips. If tomorrow bites, you'll be ready to press the sky's silk onto skin. Joke 3, padded and sleepy. You consider printing a membership card, Hyena Adjacent Health Club. Benefits include smoke facials, charcoal toothpaste, and a rigorous hand-washing program your kindergarten teacher would applaud. You look over your clinic, a reed filter. black with charcoal, a small stack of boiled water stones, the bark strips, resin pebbles, a smudge fire that hums like a cat, and feel for the first time medically calm. Not invincible, not even safe, just calm in a way that lets sleep approach without bargaining. You tuck the latrine rule under your pillow like a fairy tale, downstream, downwind, deep covered. It is the least glamorous sentence you will ever love. Before you lie down, you drink slowly, not the rewarded gulp of a parched hero. You watch your wrist bandage once more, checking for heat or angry streaks that would turn tomorrow into triage. They do not appear. You reward the absence with a tiny smear of honey on the dressing, a test of the sweet shield you promised to try. Then you cover the scent with a pinch of ash so you don't advertise dessert to the neighborhood. You lie back and tuck your ankles into the smoky halo. The insects complain politely, and then less so, and then blessedly they are puzzled somewhere else. The night repeats its hyena line from far away, the same note you've learned to file under alert, not alarm. You answer it by pulling your blanket of habits higher, clean hand, dirty hand, boil and bank, filter and smudge, latrine and distance, resin and rest. Somewhere in the ledger of survival, tiny boxes light up, yes, yes, yes. The larger boxes don't get eaten, find reliable calories, meet a band, still wait patient and necessary. But no one wins those if a knuckle goes wrong and takes the rest with it. Sleep comes on a long, even string. It smells like smoke and a little like resin, and it feels like the soft click of a door you closed on purpose. You don't dream of monsters. You dream of clean water running over stones you arranged with your own hands, a bright ribbon tying morning to morning. When the ember sighs, you sigh back, and the invisible enemies who love invitations find none written in your camp tonight. You sit with your back to the brush wall and realize how loudly the land keeps repeating. One lesson alone is a training mode, not a lifestyle. The savannah is a stadium built for teams. You start practicing how you'll enter one, what you'll offer, what you'll borrow, and how you'll listen without making the elders wish hyenas would adopt you. You rehearse your first words in silence, not "I can hunt, but I can help." A band doesn't need a hero. It needs a hinge, someone who makes doors open smoother. Your eyes follow old foot threads. You somehow missed two smaller ones. Larger, moving together, and then apart, weaving back like braids on the ground. Children. The idea turns your camp from a hideout into a waiting room. If you meet them, you'll meet rules you don't get to negotiate. Where the sleeping circle shapes itself, how the fire breathes at night, who stands first, watch, who speaks last in disputes. Mainstream fact to ground this picture. Ethnographers and archaeologists regularly estimate mobile bands at roughly 24 souls, plus or minus a clutch of babies flexing with season and luck. That number is a hand you can count with. It's also a diagram of survival math, enough eyes, enough hands, not so many mouths that a drought writes the ending. You practice together with your fire, your shelter, your snares, imagining how they would look to people able to tell at a glance whether you wake the night or set it on fire by accident. You rearrange the perimeter so a child could stumble without tripping the whole wall. You move your digging stick out of toddler height. You catch yourself smiling at the sound that doesn't exist, yet small feet rehearsing quiet, because quiet is a currency here. Quirky tidbit to fold into your hope. At the mouths of some caves, archaeologists have found tiny handprints where a child's fingers splayed beside an adult's, evidence, perhaps of lessons painted in ochre little hands, learning the world with pigment and play. You run a thumb along a lump of red earth you pocketed days ago, the ochre that behaves like sunset turned to dust. Maybe it marks a story. Maybe it blocks sun and bugs. Maybe it does both. Historians still argue whether body paint and wall paint were mainly ritual, mostly practical, or an inseparable braid, where meaning and function share a skin. You decide to wear a thin ochre smear at your temples anyway, not to posture, but to demonstrate you know the palette. This place speaks. Joke 1, a hush of humor. You glance at your reflection in a puddle, nod solemnly, and promote yourself to assistant to the regional shaman of mosquito prevention. Your ears tuned to the camp, you can't see yet rhythm. Bands move like music, call and response across thickets. A stick tapped twice to say, shift left, a soft trill to say, stay low. You hum 2 notes and make your gait match them. If you luck into a circle tonight, you'll fit your pace to theirs, not the other way around. You think about the tools you'll show first, your reed filter, your feather sticks, the 2 snares that may or may not have opinions about you by dawn. Not shiny tricks, reliable ones, the kind that lower fevers and raise breakfast rates. Midday swells into a slow rehearsal of community. You set a second hearth space at a polite distance from the first, a tiny ring where a new fire could be lit if the main one misbehaves. Redundancy reads like competence here, not paranoia. You snap 3 straight shoots to demonstrate how you'd lash a drying rack for meat or fish. You leave the lashings loose in case today turns social and someone suggests a better knot. You fish in your memory for stories you could trade because a circle pays in information as much as in food. You catalogue what you've learned where the grass ripens first, where the wash holds a stubborn puddle under rock, which acacia swears the most painful oath with its thorns. Mainstream anchor for thousands upon thousands of years. Bands braided knowledge into tale and tune, cave walls alive with animals so exact that modern wildlife biologists can guess season from painted coats. Beads of shell stone and bone that traveled astonishing distances. Proof of exchange networks older than your daydreams. Hearths layered like tree rings where people returned as predictably as birds. You picture a child tracing a painted reindeer's flank while an aunt says, "Look, winter fur." That means ice in the valley. The wall becomes a calendar you can touch. You pull a smooth stone and start scratching the floor beside your fire, drawing a valley and a notch and a swirl of tiny hoof marks. You're not an artist, you're a map maker with the world's oldest ink. If strangers arrive, this picture says you notice things worth sharing: roots, shelter, water, wind. You also collect a few shells, dull, river-worn, unpretentious, and string them on a twist of grass. It's not adornment for its own sake. It's a handshake that says, I understand, that we make meaning portable. Quirky tidbit to brighten the grit fragments of bone flutes have turned up in upper Paleolithic layers, high breathy voices coaxed from vulture wing bone or mammoth ivory. Music older than cities, older than bread, might time a drive or lull a child or invite courage to sit closer. You try a silly tune on a reed by the wash and get a noise like a polite goose. You laugh, then you practice softer because even gooses have their place when the day needs a grin. Historians still argue whether those bead chains and flutes signal status, tiers, kin, bonds, or simply the human itch to decorate time. Your practical side votes all of the above. Whatever else they did, these objects built bridges between families, valleys, seasons. You step back from your scratched map and see a thing you weren't aiming for. You've made a story prompt. A teenager with better tracking eyes could stand here and correct your lines with a stick, turning your sketch into an evening's lesson while the meat hangs in smoke. You walk a slow circle around camp, hearing how silence changes near each corner. If a group shelters here, the circle breathes one person by the thorn, another near the water path, the rest like a relaxed necklace around the coals. Tasks belong to people for an hour, then swap like pebbles in a palm. Joke too gentle, you rehearse your new job introduction. Hi, I'm the assistant ember wrangler and occasional water boiler. Strengths include not stepping on sleeping dogs and telling jokes that don't attract hyenas. Late light combs the grass and with it your hopes. A figure appears then too, where the wash kinks behind thorn. You don't wave. You adjust your posture to visible unthreatening, not a mess. Your hands rest where they can be seen. Your rock sits ready but not clenched. You let your fire's smoke spell the first sentence. We know heat, we know patience, we know how to keep night out of children's lungs. They halt at the safe distance every band practices without discussing near enough to read your camp, far enough to exit if you turn out to be a predator with clever eyebrows. You note the distribution, a tall frame with a spear that has seen repairs, a shorter body with a sling cradling a child. A third emerges a breath later, as if to say, we never travel as just two. We are not a menu. You lower your gaze once a respectful blink, then lift it again so you're not praying or hiding. You angle your body so the child can see both your hands. Mainstream fact to texture. This meeting cooperative childcare in mobile bands means a baby has more than one pair of hands to ride on. Grandmothers often passed their own childbearing raise camp survival odds by feeding, guarding, and gossiping useful gossip. The grandmother hypothesis isn't a bedtime story, it's a survival spreadsheet. You imagine the unseen elders of this group, their voices packed with don't and do, and try it with more patience. You try to look like someone who likes being told, do it with more patience. You gesture to your reed filter, pour a little water through the sip, then set it down between you and them, nearer their side. The gesture says share and also safe. You drag your heel through dust to point at your map, the valley, the notch, the hoof scribbles. You tap your ear, then the thorn stand, then make a hyena's laughing motion with your throat. The tall one's eyes crease. He nods the kind of nod that says, Your information matches his experience. Relief feels like a fruit you can peel. Quirky exchange, the child reaches a hand toward your shell string. You place it gently in those small fingers and laugh when it immediately becomes a hat. The shorter adult watches your face for any flicker of possessiveness. You offer the string with a small shrug that says, "Meaning is better when it travels." The taller one crouches, touches the scarred notch on your fireboard, and sniffs your hands, the smoke, the resin, the faint, honest note of sweat. He plucks your feather stick, tests the curls, sets it back with a tiny grunt that might be a compliment. Historians still argue whether these early social scenes skewed egalitarian or whether quiet hierarchies sorted tasks and voices. What you feel in your bones is that even in the most leveling camps, respect accrues to those who keep fires banked, children fed water, safe stories, accurate and edges repaired before anyone trips over them in the dark. Respect is a wordless ledger updated at dusk. You offer your two modest snares, not as a boast, but as a question mark. The shorter adult takes one tugs, your knots adjusts a twist, then hands it back with a palm-up motion, an invitation to mirror the correction. You do clumsy, but eager. A laugh soft as chaff slips from the child who is now wearing your shells as both hat and necklace. Joke 3 small and safe. You tap your own forehead and make a face that says, "Yes, the new person learns slow," which translates well into every language. The tall one glances at the sky, then at your brush wall, then at the way your fire breathes. He points at the ground near your second hearth spot, there a good place for theirs. The gesture is conditional. It waits for your nod. You nod. Your circle doubles not with noise but with competence. The two fires agree about wind. The child's laugh becomes part of your weather. Before full dark, a story begins not in words you catch, but in the shape of hands tracing animals into air, in the way the shorter adult pantomimes a drive, while the taller one marks a ridge with a finger. You add 2 pebbles to the map where your snares crouch, and the child solemnly relocates 1 pebble to a better spot. Everyone accepts the edit. When the flames settle into coals, someone sings a line that hums like a river under stone. You hum the second note, the one you practiced, and are rewarded with a smile that looks very much like you may stay. The cave wall behind you has space for more hands. You think about little prints in ochre and resolve tomorrow, if invited, to teach the child your 2-note hum and to learn the rhythm that calls people from thorn to fire in this camp. The band begins exactly how you hoped, with borrowed knowledge, shared heat, traded maps, and the quiet miracle of not being a single human-shaped silhouette against a too large sky. The morning after a circle feels different in your bones, like your skeleton has learned the camp's rhythm. You move inside it, not around it. Your brain, which last week tried to solve everything with app-shaped guesses, now shifts like a pack animal that finally got a proper saddle, relieved, useful, pointed toward tasks. You remind yourself you're carrying the same organ that painted aurochs by torchlight and invented needles from bone. Mainstream fact to lean on while you tie your sandals of bark, The basic structure of the human brain has remained broadly similar for tens of thousands of years. Cognitive capacity didn't sprout overnight with neon signs and spreadsheets. The difference is less hardware, more training data. You test your newly tuned senses against the camp's orchestra. You watch the tall hunter's head, how his eyes skip where his chin points when he listens. You imitate, then catch yourself, because mimicry works best when it fades into your own pattern, not when it turns you into a shadow that trips. You shrink the gap between noticing and acting. A child tosses a twig onto the edge of the fire. You nudge it fully in without commentary, catching the parent's tiny nod. Quirky tidbit to grin at as you earn micro-approval. People in bogs far from here once tossed offerings into water beads, tools, even food, as if lakes were vaults that kept secrets. You're not feeding the pond yet. You're feeding credibility. Your body has been rewriting itself quietly. Calves more honest hips, remembering to hinge feet, learning to whisper on thorn. You can thank the persistence-hunting genes you'll probably never cash in fully. Humans trade speed for stamina, rocking a freakish combo of tendons, sweat glands, and long legs that allow distance to become a weapon. You're not ready to run an antelope into heat-blurred surrender, but you are ready to carry weight without complaint, and to walk the valley twice without turning the walk into theater. Historians still argue whether hunter-gatherers had more leisure time than modern office dwellers. The original affluent society debate that haunts conferences like a polite ghost. You suspect the answer swings wildly with season and luck feast weeks of music and repairs. Then lean months of tired feet and thin jokes. Joke one stretch, light. The tall one hands you a bundled load of firewood, and you inform your shoulders very calmly that leg day and shoulder day have merged into you. Live here now. Your brain loves a mnemonic, so you hook new skills on old pegs. You map the valley as a song low note at the cattail's rising third, where the wash narrows a chorus at the termite hill with the hawk nest. Every time you cross a landmark, you hum the interval. If you forget the path, the melody tugs you back. Mainstream anchor for that trick, many traditional cultures navigate vast spaces with songlines or recited routes, memory palaces draped over land so that feet walk the same path minds already traveled. The savannah applauds with the breeze that arrives on cue at your chorus point. You bow to the wind, and keep walking. You stop to chew a strip of roasted tuber while the band debates a drive. The argument is civil, but detailed wind lines, hoof prints, cloud cover, moonrise. You catch maybe half the vocabulary and all of the geometry. The taller hunter draws in dust with a stick, and your hand twitches with the scrawl you made yesterday. He notices, flips you the stick, and waits. You redraw the notch cleaner, correct your own mistake before he can, and point to the place where birds spooked 2 mornings ago. The shorter adult adds a pebble. The child moves the pebble again. Everyone laughs. You are fluent in helpful pebble. Quirky detail to pocket as you practice birch pitch, gum chewed and spat by people in forests. Far from this grass carries tooth marks and DNA older than empires. Chewing pitch softens it into glue. Chewing ideas softens strangers into bandmates. You chew your tuba and watch your ideas loosen where they were stiff. You don't have birch, you have resin. You heat a smear to patch a crack in a water reed, a tiny repair done silently, a small gift to the group's mourning. Historians still argue whether decision-making in bands leaned consensus, or if quiet leaders curated outcomes with as much skill as any mayor, but less ego. The vote you watch is hands and head tilts, not speeches. The tall one draws a line that says later, not no, and the circle agrees, because today's wind is a gossip you don't want to amplify. You adjust your hunger to the schedule, which is to say, you practice not sulking when meat dreams reschedule themselves. Joke 2 aired only in your head, you compose a strongly worded letter to the wind, and then tear it up because the wind can read and has a temper. You spend the delay hours apprenticing your senses. The shorter adult sets a footprint exam, 3 tracks in shade, 3 in sun, 3 on scraped rock. Which prints are older? Which belong to the same leg? Which tell a story of haste? At first you guess like a tourist. Then the ground begins to talk. A crisp edge versus a melted one. A crumb of crushed grass still wet versus a curl already straw. Your finger hovers like a divining rod. Eventually you touch the correct answer before your mouth can. The adult grins nothing grand, just the smile of a teacher who enjoys teaching. Afternoon tips toward work. You didn't know you'd enjoy repair. You sit with a basket rib cage in your lap, learning how to spiral the weave so weight distributes and corners refuse to collapse. Your thumbs burn a little, your patience burns less. Mainstream fact to stitch into the rhythm microblade and microlith technologies, tiny standardized flakes. Let people kit out composite tools, barbed points for fish, inset edges for sickles, replaceable teeth for tools too precious to discard. You handle a tiny flake set into resin along a sliver of bone and feel a technological whisper tickle your modern cortex modularity, maintenance upgradability. You grin like someone who just got a software patch without the status bar. While your hands work, you ask about sleep, how the camp divides the dark. The answer is not a timetable, but a choreography new parents catch fragments. Elders do long, soft watches. Everyone listens even while dreaming because a hyena's punctuation mark cuts dreams clean in two. You volunteer for the middle watch, the hour your old life used to spend scrolling. Now you will spend it untangling stars into familiar clusters, straight line over the wash. The crooked spoon over the thorn, and hanging your song map on them so you can walk the valley at night in your head. Quirky aside, to tease a smile from your sore thumbs, someone jokes. Maybe the child, maybe your own imagination. That crimson handprints on a cave are the original. I was here. The Pleistocene's social media. You reply out loud or in spirit that at least no one doom-scrolled the bison. The tall one snorts. The child splashes your ankle with a pebble. Joke 3, contented you solemnly announce you're taking a break from cave to focus on real life. And the shorter adult pretends this is the funniest thing said all week. Historians still argue Whether life expectancy in the deep past was brutally short, or simply skewed by high infant mortality, with a long tail of elders who knew everyone's business. The camp's wrinkles are data you can touch a grandmother, with a laugh like gravel and a scar like a teacher's pointer. A grandfather whose knees talk in the morning and whose eyes spot birds at impossible distances by noon. Old here does not equal finished. It equals library. You check out a book by volunteering to sharpen bone awls under their commentary. Evening returns solace as a habit. 2 fires again, edges mended smoke, rising into clean air that smells like food and resin, and the day's dust summarizing itself. You sing your 2 notes because that is the part you own, and someone plats a 3rd above you that makes the child dance in a circle that stops exactly where the fire stops. Your brain notices how much it didn't notice last week and how much more it might notice by next. You breathe not with relief but with commitment. The verdict you rehearsed alone now makes more sense together. Same brains, softer habits. Convenience didn't break your mind, it miscalibrated your dials. The camp's work is recalibration. Watch, carry, fix, wait, sing, learn, point, hush, repeat. The moments of adrenaline predator flood fever matter, less than this woven routine, a net that catches you before you fall into trouble. The modern part of you still nervous about performance reviews, whispers, "Am I doing enough?" The band answers without words by handing you tomorrow's bundle, heavier than yesterday's, easier than fear. You lie down inside the circle and let the stars pass your checkpost one by one, and for once you do not count minutes. You count lessons, and the count runs out, not because you're done, but because sleep arrives politely and you accept. You wake before anyone touches your shoulder, which is its own kind of invitation. There's work waiting that announces itself, not with a drum, but with quiet absences. A hole in a wall where wind sneaks. A pile of bones that want sorting. A child's sandal, 2 bark wraps, and a smile that needs a fresh tie. You start where no one started yesterday. That's how you join a band without speeches. You also bring the one thing you can truly own on day 4, of not being eaten, a map of your mistakes. You offer it with a grin. Don't try to stalk guinea fowl in a headwind. They read thoughts. The shorter adult snorts, amused that you learned the national birds rules the hard way. Mainstream fact to braid into your morning humility. Cooperation scales survival. Studies of hunter-gatherer sharing practices show meat and labor sloshing across tents and kin lines like water today, ours tomorrow, yours, next week, no one's. If the hunt sulks, insurance here is edible and immediate. You test your promise by dropping half your roasted tuber into the child's hand as easily as you drop a pebble onto the map. The tall hunter passes you a strip of smoked meat like an equation balancing itself. You are not auditioning to be the loudest. You're auditioning to be predictable in useful ways. You show up for middling chores without needing to be asked twice, hauling water, grinding seed, watching the drying rack, while others chase or nap. You volunteer for the boring middle watch again. Boring keeps children sleeping and elders less tired. Quirky tidbit to stick on the camp wall of shared humor. You coin a new job title for yourself, Chief Officer of Nothing Happened, and everyone laughs because nothing happened is the best daily report. Historians still argue whether the deep past carved jobs by sex in stone, or whether bands flexed across tasks with more fluidity than modern stereotypes expect. You watch quietly and see a spectrum. The best thrower throws. The best weaver weaves. The elder who knows plants corrects everyone. The parent with the baby hip sways while sorting thorns out of blanket rolls. And if a limb is injured, rolls reshape like water finding a new path. You file the lesson where you keep flint flakes, sharp, durable, ready to scrape nonsense off your old beliefs. Joke one-soft when the tall hunter hands you a spear to carry, just in case you mutter a ceremonial acceptance speech to the blade about responsible citizenship and voting in all local drives. The child volunteers to be your campaign manager. You bow gravely to your new staff. The band tests you without saying so. A drift of cloud rolls in. Someone glances at the fire. You are already feeding the edge and banking the coal heart for absence-proof warmth. A vulture circles. Someone glances at the racks. You're already there, rearranging so the fattest strips hang where smoke hugs them longest. The short adult fingers your knots and finds them better than yesterday, worse than theirs. Perfect. It leaves them something to teach this afternoon, and teaching is the currency that turns guest into ours. Mainstream anchor. The sort you feel in your ribs while weaving groups that invest time in novices. Children, newcomers, limping uncles are betting on tomorrow's labor pool and on the long memory of gratitude in communities where grudges cost calories. You repay with attention the gold coin that is somehow heavier and easier to lift than water. You ask the grandmother to name 3 plants you've been avoiding. She names 5. You learn 7 because her story runs pathways around your first question and brings back more than you asked. You fix your face into the teach me shape and discover it is also the feed me shape. Quirky glint, small and bright. The child teaches you a hand game. A clap and slap rhythm that looks like nonsense until you feel the way it sneaks, tracking lessons into your wrists. Fast, slow, fast. Look, left, look right, freeze, move. Play is a disguise worn by education, a costume with pockets where serious things fit. You applaud the performance and get a bow so elaborate you worry the child will topple into the fire. The taller hunter catches the back of a tiny tunic like he's been catching that child all day. Historians still argue whether Paleolithic art and music were primarily practical in coding migration schedules and herd behavior, or whether they flourished because humans insist on beauty even when hungry. The evening song answers it's both. The lyrics sketch the ridge and the season. The harmony makes a cold night feel a degree warmer without adding a stick to the coals. You sing your 2 notes, then try a third. It wobbles. The grandmother steadies it with a hum. You have joined not by announcing, but by blending. Joke 2. Dust dry you autograph your new job title into the dirt, CONH, and the child pretends it stands for Commander of No Hyenas. You decide never to correct them. Days take shape with a confidence you didn't think you'd find here. The hyena laugh moves farther away. The mosquito choir thins under smoke and sleeves. The wash still bargains, but you know how to make water polite. You are not safe. You are safer, which is the only adjective the land allows. Your ledger of small payoffs grows fewer cuts, fewer wasted steps, fewer panic sprints, more successful, nothing happened shifts. The band in return pays you in tomorrow space inside the circle. A joke shared before sleep, a child's shell string, returned to your lap with an extra pebble threaded for luck. Mainstream fact to etch under your ribs where courage lives. Humans colonized harsh places earlier than we used to think. High altitudes, cold steppes, stingy coasts, because groups engineered their days into safety with tools, maps, stories, and stubbornness. Innovation wasn't fireworks, it was 1,000 nudges. Your nudges are tiny, move the rack, thicken the wall bank, the coals tighten the knot, and yet they lean the day away from tragedy and toward soup. Quirky closing gift from the camp's sense of humor. Someone smears a ceremonial mole of ash across your nose while pretending to crown you with a coiled grass circlet, your initiation into the most ancient order of watching where you step. You accept with pomp, then immediately trip over the child's bark sandal. Everyone howls. Joke 3 resigned unite yourself, Sir falls a lot, and vow to protect the realm from misplaced sandals. Historians still argue whether the deep past deserves our romance or our awe. Romance tells bad lies about ease. Awe tells good truths about grit. You choose awe because awe keeps you alert and kind. It makes you thank your ancestors for scaffolding your life with cleverness, and it makes you thank your band for letting you rent a corner of their circle while you pay in work and humility. You look out over the valley and know what you didn't know in the first minute you woke here. Could you make it alone? Maybe for a handful of days if luck liked your face. Could you make it together long enough to turn babies into elders, and elders into libraries, and libraries into maps scratched on stone and hummed under stars? That is the real calculus of survival, not you, but you plus us. The fire is small. The night is large. You let the pace loosen sentences, lengthening the way shadows do when the moon climbs without hurry. Coals shift with the softest sigh, a cat turning in sleep. The brush wall no longer looks like sticks leaning. It looks like a promise, simple and serviceable, that the wind will stroke instead of shove. Far off, the hyena's laugh is no longer a taunt. It is a weather report you already accounted for. The wash murmurs a little, not loud, just enough to remind you that water keeps moving through stone, and that you have learned how to make it kind. Breathe in slow and even. Notice how your shoulders release, how your hands, which learned knots and feather sticks, and the geometry of quiet, finally go slack. The band around you arranges the dark into safety. One person turns another, settles. A child's foot rests on a parent's ankle like a tiny warm punctuation mark. The stars do their patient work overhead, precise and unbothered points you could hang a song upon if you needed to walk the valley with your eyes closed. You are not racing tomorrow. Tomorrow will come with the same old errands. Check the snares, mend the gap boil, the water, listen for birds, hum the root, and those errands will open into stories when the sun leans west. For now the only task is to rest so your senses can be bright when dawn opens its quiet door. Let your breath follow the embers glow fuller, then softer, then a warm, steady line. If a thought tries to sprint, let it walk beside the wash for a while and fade into the reeds. If a memory wants attention, give it one slow nod and tuck it into the pocket where you keep the shell string and the tiny pebble of luck. The night is wide, but your corner of it is gentle. Drift there. The fire will keep the edge. The circle will keep the rest. And you who learn to listen will keep sleep.